San Jose Charter Review Commission to order, and I'm going to ask the clerk to take the roll, please.
Barbara Marshman. Christina Johnson.
Here.
Elizabeth Monley.
Here.
Ellie Matsumura.
Here.
Enrico Calendar.
Good evening.
Frank Kametsky.
Here.
Garrick Percival.
Here.
George Sanchez. Hui Tran. Jeremy Barus.
Here.
Jose Posadas. Lun Diep. Linda Lazat.
Here.
Luis Barrocio.
Here.
Magnolia Siegel.
Present.
Maria Fuentes.
Here.
Sammy Robledo.
Here.
Jerry Segura.
Here.
T. Tran. Tobin Gilman.
Here.
Veronica Amador. Yong Zhao.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's move our agenda to the consent calendar, which tonight is just to receive and file the letters from the public. Does anybody in the public wish to address the commission on the consent?
Yes, we have Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you. Blair Beekman here. An interesting meeting last week. I hope we're moving forward with the letter from Jennifer McGuire last week in a way that is negotiative towards the future ideas of how the City Charter Commission can talk about reimagine ideas still. It can be very relevant. It was mentioned at the task force, Reimagine Task Force last week, the ideas about there's certain mechanics involved that if the task force works on a city charter oversight process, if the task force works on a police oversight process, it's up to the city charter to create the mechanics of how that can appear in a city charter, which it'll be mandatory to do that. On top of that, it's my hopes that, what I mentioned last week, I don't quite know everything at play, but there can still be broad considerations of how to talk about reimagine, equity, open democracy, green sustainability, and actually indigenous issues, Ohlone people from this area, how all those issues can fit into the future of the charter process and how that appears in the future of the charter process. I think those are very valid questions for all of us still that shouldn't be denied or rejected. We just have to figure out some new ways to do that, I suppose. And that's why we're in a negotiative process with the city manager and others at this time. And I'm assuming that's what you're going through. I think by the end of this month into early October, we can figure out some good answers. This is my summary and feelings of the situation. Good luck what you're doing at this time, and thank you.
Sorry, Tessa Woodmansey.
Thank you so much. So basically, I wrote you a letter saying that I wasn't happy about the fact that we didn't address the climate crisis, even though it was on the agenda. And, in terms of, I guess, discussing right now your consent calendar, in terms of the way the meeting went last week, is that we get a letter from our city manager. And, even though she is the city manager, she's still a citizen, because what it is about our Charter Review Commission, or our commissions in general, as we all learned from that wonderful presentation you had about the history of our commissions, that those are the people's voice. That's what it is about, this is us having a chance to create the policies that we need as a community. And that's true democracy. So this is, so basically, having the city manager write a letter and then the whole meeting go towards that, especially after we were addressing the issue of climate crisis. And which needs to be, when you have a crisis, that's what you're supposed to talk about. And so basically we need to be talking about that, and we need to be addressing it. It needs to be an urgent call to put it in our charter, just like the issue of when we're going to vote. I mean, it's even more critical because it's dealing with the survival of our species and all the other species that are threatened with extinction. So, basically, that's just what I'm talking about is, so I'm saying, hey, that's what you did with, the letter from the city manager. You made it part of the agenda. Well, then I want my issue as, as being something that comes to our city, into the agenda to say we need to address this, because I know that nobody wants to address this because it really demands, such change in the way our lifestyles.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, please.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Bruce and Commissioner Monley, thank you. Clerk will take the roll or take the vote.
Barbara Marshman, Christina Johnson,
Yes.
Elizabeth Monley,
Aye.
Ellie Matsumuro,
Aye.
Enrico Calendar,
Aye.
Frank Kaminsky,
Yes.
Garrick Percival,
Yes.
George Sanchez, Hui Tran,
I apologize. I just came on, so I'm going to abstain.
Jeremy Barus,
Aye.
Jose Posadas,
Yes.
Lund Diep, Linda Lizotte,
Yes.
Luis Barrocio,
Yes.
Magnolia Siegel,
Yes.
Maria Fuentes,
Yes.
Sammy Robledo,
Yes.
Jerry Segura,
Yes.
T. Tran, Tobin Gilman,
Yes.
Veronica Amador, Young Zhao.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes.
Thank you. This evening, I want to, for members of the public, be clear about our agenda this evening. We are now going to be receiving the recommendations from the Governance Structure Subcommittee. There are four, I understand that there are four recommendations that the subcommittee is making to the commission. The process that we will be using tonight is that there will be a commissioner presenting the actual recommendation to the commission and public. That takes about 8 minutes or less, I hope. And then there will be time for public comment on that item. And then it'll come back to the commission for their discussion. We will do that process 4 times. So we'll have the first issue. We'll go through the commissioner's description, public hearing, public comment, and then commissioner's discussion. And then we'll take up the second recommendation. So we're going to go through this 4 times this evening. And we're going to start with Commissioner Miskey as the first recommendation tonight.
Yeah, and thank you. Is it possible to share my, yes, it is. Okay. I'm trying to find the item. I'm not sure I have it. Hold on, I'm sorry. Can people see the item or no?
We can see the downloaded version of the agenda for the day.
Okay, that's not what I have.
Commissioner Meitzke, you're able to select different tabs or windows.
Yeah,
So you might have just selected the wrong tab.
I see that. I don't necessarily see my item though. Let's see. How's that? No?
Same thing you were sharing before, the
Okay.
agenda for today.
I will just.
Do you have a presentation?
I do not know. I was going to actually
okay.
look off of the actual light itself, but I think I can just.
Okay.
I think it's simple enough just to go off of the that I can talk to it. So what this item is future charter review commissions. As I think we all know, the last time there was a charter review commission was 35 years ago, and that was when the city council had asked for it. And you know, the charter review commissions that have occurred in the past have always been required or directed by the city council itself, and they had always been advisory to the city council. And so we looked at whether there was something that we should add maybe to the charter itself to require periodic reviews of the charter. So what we looked at, we found that there were 2 cities in the country that actually have something like that in their charter: Columbus, Ohio, and Portland, Oregon. One is an advisory to the council. The other one actually has a clause in there that if some sort of supermajority of commissioners votes to add something to a charter, then that would go directly to the ballot without going through the city council. So we kicked around those 2 ideas in terms of a future commission for future commissions, and it was pretty robust discussion that we had. Kind of very interesting as we got into the issues. We did not have consensus on this, but we did have what you see presented in today's agenda is really what the majority feels they would like to propose on the issue. So what we're looking at really is that we would have something in the charter that requires the charter to be reviewed by a commission every 10 years. And we made it 2 years. We would start it in the year 2028, and that would be 2 years before the census is taken. So it would be a 2-year term with the ability to lengthen it if approved by the council. And then that would give enough time to deal with some of the issues. I think as we see in our commission this year, the council gave a specific direction, but there's a lot of other issues, especially as our third committee is looking at, that there's a lot of things that came from the public to be reviewed. And so it seemed to make sense that we did have a charter review commission periodically. So I think most people felt that that was the case. Not all, some people, some of the commissioners felt that you really want to reserve it for some of the big issues and have council dictate, when and it occurs and what we want to look at. So the other issue is that we had a very interesting discussion on whether there should be any authority to the commission to place something directly on the ballot. If you all recall, in our strategy, one of our strategy sessions, the city of Detroit actually has that in their ability with their commission. And so the majority did not feel comfortable in having unelected folks send something directly to the ballot. And so what we determined that if there was, and what our language indicates, is that if there's a supermajority and we're calling it, I believe 17 members of our 23-member commission, if they would approve something, it would go, the city council would still have the right to reject it if there was a supermajority of the council that would vote to reject it. And if not, then it would go forward as a ballot measure. So that was kind of the compromise that we felt. Again, folks didn't really think that we should have that the unelected folks, the elected commission should be able to put something directly on the ballot, especially when there's something in the charter already that allows citizens to do that if they so wish. So in terms of who benefits, we feel like the entire San Jose community benefits from the proposal, since it does establish this mechanism that the charter is going to be reviewed on a periodic basis. In terms of the arguments against it, there was a lot of discussion is that if we do this, it really becomes, it almost starts to look like the initiative process, California. And some people feel that's a bit out of control at the moment, that initiative process, and that it allows for somebody with a political agenda or the ability to be misused in a way that may not be healthy for it, that it really should be reserved just for larger issues that really affect how the governance structure of the city. So really what it comes down to is more, what this does, it allows for more direct democracy, I will call it, versus representative democracy, where the people have another tool that they could use to look at some issues and determine if anything should be changing in the charter. Must this be a charter revision? No. This certainly could be done in terms as a policy issue. If it was a policy issue, most likely, though, there would not be that a clause in there in terms of getting something directly onto the ballot by the commission. So that probably would be there. And yeah, again, it would be, well, I'll leave it at that. So again, we had a robust discussion that kind of generally goes over this proposal. We did also include language in there that that the city would provide the necessary resources that the commission deems it needs to complete its work. And as long as those are reasonable, that the city would provide those. And so that's pretty much the proposal in a nutshell. And I will invite any subcommittee members to either fill in something I may have missed or correct me if I misspoke.
Thank you, Commissioner Miskey. Any subcommittee members want to add anything? Seeing none, I'm going to move to then public comment on these recommendations. The clerk will call the first speaker.
Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you. Blair Beekman here. To first clarify, in my previous public comment, I was trying to respond to the letters from the public from Pancho Guevara. For this item, a very much of a thank you that, this was a very interesting report, I felt, and very well balanced. It had, I guess, kind of a California way of looking at things compared to, say, Portland or Columbus, Ohio. And thank you for that. I found it to be well balanced and towards a progressive idea that I suppose is kind of the ideals of California and how we address our issues. So thank you for that. For myself, I am not so great at talking and understanding the depth of concepts of direct democracy versus the democracy of social action, I guess it's called. I can't even think of its proper term. My educational skills and speaking the language of where people are at in this subject matter is really lagging and far behind. I think from this, I'm considering that there is a very possible future of a participatory democracy. That does try to address the future of representational democracy. That's how I think I'm viewing it. I'm not going to use the term direct democracy because there is problems and questions with the proposition process and the recall process of governor voting in California that needs to be re-examined, it seems. Thank you for creating the idea of creating a charter review, say every 10 years. I don't know if it's either right before or right after a census taking that you do this, but that's smart. And it'll keep us thinking and aware and present and present for good changes we can make. So a good start to this, it sounds like. Thank you.
Roland.
Thank you. So briefly, I think I agree with the majority of the subcommittee that non-elected should not be putting something on the ballot with some kind of supervision by elected. And I do appreciate the suggestion about a council supermajority overruling or whatever. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. And are we moving forward here, or are we just extensively into, I believe it's referred to as a sausage-making process? Thank you.
Alina.
Evening, commissioners. Thank you, Commissioner Frank Matsky. I really enjoyed that presentation and I appreciate your thoughtful proposal. I agree that our charter needs to be updated much more regularly than every 35 years. And in the same way, that our terms and conditions are constantly updated from apps to software to our services, to keep up with current times, I feel that, our constitutional document should be the same, so that can always be much more resilient and responsive to what's happening currently. And I would say to add some more specificity, as much as we provide, robust civic education around the process of our, city budget, and it's, months long of education and community outreach, I think that we can apply that to our charter process within this 10-year span. And, so you have civic education, and then you have the recruitment process, and then you have the commissioners who work for, it should be a 2 to 4 year term like other commissions. And so that by the end of the 10 years, you kind of have this streamlined process of community engagement and education and recruitment to participate in the commission. And then it's ready to go and ready to start working and submit their proposals or studies or responses. And as you've also experienced in this process, it's a lot of work. In the last 7 months, I've been adding up the hours, and you have met over nearly 70 hours. And that's not including the time you take to research and study and the subcommittee meetings. And so I think expanding this timeline to allow more meaningful participation, both in the commission and within the community, will only yield a more better solutions and some collective collaboration within the community and all the district members. And yeah, so thank you for this presentation. I really love it. And I think that the commissioner should approve and move this proposal forward. Thank you.
Tessa?
Thank you. Well, my only comment about that is in regards to saying that the politicians that are in place will decide what is going to be reviewed in regards to our review of our charter. I don't think is going to work, because we see that the issues of the politicians are too connected with the ones that fund their campaigns, the businesses, the corporations. So to put all that power, that they will be the ones to determine when and if we look at our charter, I think has to be looked at differently. And that what the charter is looking at now is trying to create both equity and our climate crisis, to have those two lenses as our lens in terms of going forward in what we do. And so with the climate crisis being the most important thing, because all the colors and all the different orientations, I mean, we're talking about our species and our civilization going forward. And so this is the most critical thing that we're facing. And so we need to have that lens, at least that lens, and we can add on the equity lens as well, because of pre-existing preferences that we haven't been taking care of, and we need to take care of the people. That we need to look at it through those lenses of to decide what needs to be in our charter, so that we have a charter, we have a city, and these are the issues that we're facing. So not to leave it in the hands of the politicians that are greased by the corporations and the businesses. And we're seeing it now in terms of COVID, that they're not doing their job, which is protecting us from harm. So we must look at it in terms of our climate.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, thoughts, comments, feedback to the subcommittee on the recommendations? Commissioner Hui Tran.
Thank you for the proposal and to the committee for its work. So my question is around basically having a charter amendment approved and then brought before the voters. This proposal, does it envision any kind of vetting process to ensure that whatever proposals come from the Charter Review Commission, assuming that it meets some, the threshold to bypass the council and go directly to the voters? Does it envision having some kind of process or protocol to ensure that whatever gets proposed to the voters, complies with the law in any other sense? For example, let's say somebody says, hey, San Jose should secede from the state of California, and that passes the Charter Review Commission. Is there some secondary procedure or protocol that would, vet whatever gets brought out from the Charter Review Commission and brought before the voters?
We didn't really discuss that, but I think that's a good point. And I think we probably would all agree that it probably should be reviewed by the attorney's office and whatnot for that very question, and making sure that it's acceptable and legal before we move forward. But we can look into that and make sure there's language to that effect.
I just wonder right now, obviously City Council has access to the services of the city attorney. Sorry, I'm off camera again because otherwise my computer is just freezing. really bad internet lately. Is there anything right now to stop the city council from putting something illegal on the ballot? Obviously, I'm not in favor of that. I'm just curious sort of what already exists for those purposes.
I can answer that question. There are processes under the law that allows the city attorney's office as well as citizens to challenge the actions of a city council. If they put something on the ballot that would be either unconstitutional or illegal, that can remove it from the ballot.
Okay. Commissioner Gilman.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, for your presentation. I do have reservations about the putting things on the ballot. I believe that if a citizen or a resident or a group of residents wanted to bypass the city council and put an initiative or a measure on the ballot, they have to collect 35,000 signatures. And if I'm understanding this proposal correctly, 17 political appointees could take something and have it put on the ballot. I do understand that a supermajority in the council could stop that, but that still seems to give a tremendous amount of power to 17 political appointees. And that's just my only comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. Commissioner Marshman.
I actually agree with Commissioner Gilman. I have grave reservations about giving an appointed group the power to put something directly on the ballot when it's not that easy for other folks. And we elect the council and they can do it, but we're not elected, and I do not support this, even though I thought it was worth bringing forward. I don't support the idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshman. Commissioner Segal.
If Commissioner Gilman still has a question. His hand is still up.
Sorry, I'm taking it down, my bad.
Okay, I would support this. And the reason I would support it is because yes, we do have elected representatives, but once we have them, there are very few elected representatives that represent 1 million people. And once they're there, they have very specific ideas. And so it ends up becoming many years of an echo chamber where everything they believe is reflected in policies, and that just goes on until they're no longer in office. So to the proposal you guys came up with, sort of gets around that echo chamber that can happen. And it allows that even though people are still in office for their terms, there can be other ideas from the public that can come forward. And I think that's absolutely necessary. So I would support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Segal. Commissioner Matsumura.
Yeah, just building on something that Commissioner Gilman raised, to get a charter amendment on the ballot is actually a higher threshold than to get an ordinance on the ballot. It's roughly double, if I'm remembering correctly. So I'm just putting that out as a point of fact. And I'm also conflicted. I'm probably more supportive of this idea than Barbara, but also was like, well, let's bring it to the full commission to see what people say. But I think you could argue that the threshold of 70,000 signatures is possible for very few stakeholders within the city, if any. Certainly more possible for those with huge pocketbooks. And so I think there is a question. This might not be the way to address it, but I just do want to put it into the mix that that the threshold for charter change currently outside of the city council is nearly impossible.
Thank you, Commissioner Matsumura. Attorney Vanny, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, to get a charter amendment on the ballot is 15%, whereas to get an ordinance initiative measure on the ballot is 5% of the registered voters for the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you so much for that.
Commissioner Posadas.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that in general, I'm supportive of any efforts that increase civic participation, whether it's on this existing commission or future charter commission or any of the other existing commissions that we have in the city of San Jose. So I would be supportive of this. Regarding the future commission becoming overly politicized, I would not be that concerned any more than any existing commission is politicized, whether it's the planning commission or another, because that will unfortunately probably happen with any commission. But in general, like I said, I would be supportive of any efforts to get more citizens to participate in our local government.
Thank you, Commissioner Posadas. Any other one want to speak to this issue? Commissioner Huaytran again?
So earlier it was just a question, but as I'm thinking about it more, I kind of have more concerns. And I'm actually equating this to the process that many have taken to amend the California Constitution. One of the concerns or one of the issues that came up for I mean, at least a decade was just the issue of for something like, for example, ballot box budgeting, where the initiative process in the state of California was used to firmly set proportions or what amount of the state budget would have to be spent on what, and it created budget issues for the state for a very long time, a lot of inflexibility. I'm intrigued by the idea, but I'm also concerned that if we open up this pathway to amend the charter, and it becomes so open that you can kind of put anything you want into the charter because the Charter Review Commission wants it, and then a very, very well-financed entity can just put together a very strong campaign to support it, we start moving into this realm where we start seeing issues like ballot box budgeting, right? And so I'm a little bit wary on this proposal. I mean, having a standing Charter Review Commission, fully support that idea, but giving it the ability to move an idea forward directly to the voters around the council, just it kind of screams back to that issue that we've been dealing with in the state of California for quite a while.
Thank you, Commissioner Tran. Anyone else? Attorney Vanny?
Yes, I wanted to just raise just a couple of comments. One thing to consider is that a body like this with the authority to make government decisions like putting something on the ballot may not be considered advisory under the law, meaning the members of said commission would need to file what's referred to as a Form 700 and disclose their financial conflicts of interest, as well as refrain from participating in decisions that would benefit those financial interests. Second, there are certain measures that can't be placed on a primary ballot. I explained at the last meeting that employment matters can't be placed on a June primary ballot. And then also one thing to specify, and this is an issue that comes up common, is when you intended to specify 8 council members, did you mean 8 council members, or did you intend to refer to 2/3 council members? Just something to clarify. If it's 8, that's fine. That just means that if there's a vacancy, you still require 8. If there's a vacancy, for example, then that number goes down.
Thank you. Commissioner Fuentes.
Yes, thank you. I just want to comment that we're going to be able to see what it's like for a commission, Charter Review Commission, to present ideas to the City Council to be put on the ballot. And we'll be able to firsthand see what the process looks like, how ideas from a Charter Review Commission are addressed by the City Council as we move forward with our recommendations. So it's just a comment that I'm looking forward to seeing how that works out.
Thank you, Commissioner Fuentes. Commissioner Massey.
Yeah, just to answer Mr. Vandy's question, I was looking at a 75% supermajority, and with such low numbers, you don't really hit exactly 75. So I think both where the numbers came from were just below 75, not quite there, but they were more than 2/3. But that's, yeah, I thought it'd be easier just to have a number versus a percentage.
And if the intention is to do a percentage, we would want to say something like 3/4 or something like that, because when you specify a number, that means that 8 council members will have to vote whether or not there are 10, 9, 8, etc. And if there's less than 8, then they can't functionally vote on it or pass anything.
Thank you for that clarity. Any other comments or thoughts, questions for this subcommittee's recommendation? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to our next item, which is Commissioner Marshman going to make her next presentation. Again, for members of the public, we'll go through the commissioner's recommendations from the subcommittee, public testimony, and then we'll hear from the commissioners asking questions or their discussion. Commissioner Marshman, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize for being late. I had a wrong time written down. Let me go through this fairly quickly because what we are proposing here, and this is adding council districts to make smaller districts and possibly better represent communities and individuals in the city. Frank brought this up when he was with the other committee, brought it over because it seemed like a government structure issue, and I agreed. What we are actually recommending, though, is not putting it on the ballot now. We think, I personally think it's something that the city needs to seriously look at. But unfortunately, redistricting is underway for the next 10 years and well underway. And a lot of money has been spent on research, and a commission like us been working for a long time. And there's no way this change could be passed in time to avoid huge costs in time and money. And, you know, it would probably be fairly wrenching to try to do it without much notice, even if people like the idea, which I suspect they will. So we think that we would like to do some sort of advisory memo asking that if there is a regular commission approved, which we do, I think, all recommend, that it take up this matter and take it up in a time that gives plenty of time for research and does not, and is in plenty of time for the 2030 census redistricting. One of the reasons I became more convinced of it is some folks involved in the redistricting commission feel that this is going to be a difficult one, because development in the city has been very uneven in the last 10 years. A lot in Berryessa because of the BART station, things like that. And there are concerns that Berryessa is no longer going to be able to stay together as a community. And I think the people who are involved in that probably would be good folks to be able to talk about it after it's over. We are suggesting that the review examine whether dividing the city into maybe 12 districts. I think we all feel, I know I feel, it's important to go slowly with something like this, because if you dramatically increase the number of council members, then you dramatically change the whole dynamic of city government, which isn't often a really good idea. But you'd want to know, could this really help better group like communities? I think you'd want to have a sense of whether there's public support out there before you go to a lot of work of putting it together, because this is a case where, if we might decide it's the best thing for people, but if people don't want it, I hate to let it get to the ballot and have that be the huge fight there. I'd like to have a sense ahead of time, as there certainly was with going to districts in the first place. Folks knew ahead of time this is what community groups wanted, people wanted it. I'd like to know that most of the large cities, I think six of the 10 largest cities in the country have 11 or fewer council members. There are not a lot out there with many. And I don't know if any have increased the numbers recently. So I would like, that's something that needs to be done in research. Look at something like Seattle. They are unusual. They have 25 council members, even though they're a much smaller city than we are. It's got to be a very different kind of government, and somebody needs to look at that. We just didn't do it because we didn't see the point in. We don't think it would be responsible to put it on this ballot. And they could also look at whether there are other ways to improve representation and equity in representation and in providing services without adding council members. I mean, some council members now do this really well and reach out to their people, know what their people think, and build support for ideas, or find out, they respond to their community. Some less so, and it's I don't know that there's any way to deal with staffing and so on that might help that become something that's effective, equally effective in other communities. So I'm going to stop now for questions, since we are just making this an advisory measure for the next charter review, and not, or if the council rejects that, then I think the council should take it up and consider putting it on the ballot for next time.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshman. We'll go to the public. First speaker can be called.
Tessa Wood-Metzi.
Thank you. Oh, good. Well, thank you, Barbara Marshman. Appreciate your insights and research into different governments. And I was excited to hear that Seattle had 25 council members. I think that's great, because of my experience with our city council members has been terrible. They don't represent me, all of them, from Ken Yeager to Pierre Luigi Oliverio to Deb Davis. And so, it's been terrible. And so how do we get more representation? And I really appreciated what Commissioner Segal was saying too, that it becomes a echo chamber of values. And I see that in terms of our general plan, and that our general plan is all about jobs. And that's why we're having a housing crisis. And yet, even if you want to change the general plan, you can't, because it's all, you can spend the $30,000 to propose a general plan change. But the only thing that's going to get accepted is the general plan as it is. And so it is an echo chamber, and that's a problem. And then in terms of all the issues I've had in my community, without any support with the pollution and noise issues that we've been facing. And we always came up with that we need more local representation, even with this hotel that is planned for our neighborhood. Our Deb Davis didn't share it. And when we say, oh, there's a lot of good outreach, yeah, Matt Mahan does a good job. But do all of them do a good job? No. And so, so we do need more representation. And I definitely support putting more representation on our council. And I guess that hopefully, that should be done sooner than later. I don't think we have to wait. I thought hopefully maybe this chamber.
Claire Beekman.
Hi, thank you for this item. I guess to quickly comment, thank you for the words of Tessa on the previous item and others, that I was able to see more clearly that it's the ideas of to have the city charter review every 10 years before a census, and perhaps actually before a census, and perhaps every 20 years instead of every 10 years. Maybe that can be a solution to very good points made in the previous item. Sorry to take so long to say that. For this item, just a thank you. I've been learning how to really classify you know, the ideas of reimagine equity and open democracy that we're doing in the city charter process and how that can work. These are ideas of equity for myself. And so thank you. It's a learning process to understand how this sort of process can develop. And good luck in how we can move forward with it, and you want to go slowly with it. I guess I don't quite know what else to say about this item at this time, but I am better understanding what it's trying to offer and do, and I'm more and more interested in ideas of what it can do in the future. So good luck in how this can be a work in progress, and thank you.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Commissioners want to discuss this item. Thoughts, comments, questions, feedback for the subcommittee? Commissioner Sanchez.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. One, Commissioner Marshman talked about about cities that were going through it, or lack of cities going through such a procedure. But we take a look at Denver, which is going through this right now, and they are increasing their representation on the city council. And if you take a look at the numbers from what they were originally back in the 1970s to 60-some thousand to over 100,000 constituents that each council member represents, and you can see that the workload is considerable. This is from somebody who's worked at City Hall and been answering phone calls throughout the day, and it's just overwhelming. And so our constituents are not being represented as they should be, because there's just too many issues and just too many constituents that each council member is responsible for. And that's why cities like Denver are going in the direction of increasing their representation on the city council. So I think we need to take a look at Denver in terms of what they're doing, and take a look how we can use that as an example for our city to move forward and increase the representation that we have in City Hall. I think it's I just see it as a win-win situation, and we can take a look at different ways of increasing our increasing the numbers of city council districts. But I think I know that it may be 17, might be maybe a little stretch, but I think somewhere in there we have to take a look at a number that we feel somewhat comfortable with, and move forward. And I think this is an opportunity we have that comes around every 20 years. When's the last time a commission like this met? Was 20, 30 years ago. So we have the opportunity before us, and I think we need to take advantage of that opportunity and move forward. Take a look at a number that we feel comfortable with, but move forward with increasing the number of city council members that we have at this time. And we're doing it for our constituents, who are lacking, very much lacking in representation at City Hall at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. Commissioner Amador, then Commissioner Posadas, then Commissioner Gilman. Commissioner Amador.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Sanchez, for mentioning that. That lack of representation that we currently have. And Commissioner Marshman, if you haven't, unfortunately, I don't think you've been in the situation where your voice has not been heard, right? Where you haven't been heard. And as we saw a couple weeks ago, the data of how much in districts, in commissions, district representation is so low. And which are those districts? The same districts that need those resources, the same districts that their voices are not being heard. And again, I would really want to know where you got that research of what communities you went to that said we currently don't want to increase council members, because I would like to learn more from their point of view, right, on those communities, because I know in the communities that I've been, it's something that we often are talking about. How can we increase more representation? How can we have somebody that represents us and not represents hundreds, thousands of people, but rather a small portion as we're looking back into time and how many people were being represented. So again, I really want to know, would like to know, those communities that you did that research with, would love to get in conversations with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Posadas?
Yes, I see this proposal of adding additional council districts as increasing not just obviously the representation, but really the participation of our community. And it just goes to speak to what my fellow commissioners just said right now, which is they feel that there are some communities, some neighborhoods that are not being represented. And for them, they don't have an ally, a friend on the city council. And so this proposal really is about them and having their voices heard, having them at the table as well. I don't think that costs should not prevent us from doing the right thing. I believe this is the right thing. The timing may not be right right now because of the current redistricting commission, but I would like to see this proposal in the very near future, and I would be supportive of that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Posadas. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, just something to consider as we talk later on about mayoral powers vis-a-vis the council and the city manager. I believe that if the city of San Jose were to move to a strong mayor type of structure, that the mayor then becomes an executive and no longer a voting member of the city council. And if that were to come to fruition, that might be a scenario where at least one additional seat could be created. So there's some, I just wanted to draw attention to the potential similarities and overlap between those two ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. And Commissioner Marshman, I see your hand, but I'm going to go to Commissioner Fuentes first and then come back to you. Commissioner Fuentes. You're on mute, Commissioner Fuentes.
I'm sorry. I was just saying that I'm very interested in hearing what Commissioner Marshman is going to say, but I will go ahead and comment. I really want to acknowledge and appreciate the many positive comments that have come out from commissioners as well as the public regarding adding new members. And I agree with what people are saying in terms of this will really increase the participation. And one thing that as we were looking at is on the committee, the subcommittee, I went from thinking, the status quo seems to work to realizing that if we were to increase the number of seats, that as Commissioner Sanchez is mentioning, that we would have a better inclusive representation of the community. And I even go as far as thinking that what if we had this, an expanded city council, would we now have the high level of disparities in our city if we had more voices and we were including more people? So I think, I'm not sure the process that's going to be followed in terms of our recommendation, but I would definitely like to see our subcommittee continue discussing this item in the feedback and to see if there isn't a way that we were concerned with the redistricting process that's going on right now and recognizing that to make the change right now or even propose to make it now would be problematic. However, we should think about really figuring out, well, how soon could the city council put this on the ballot and make a change in time for the next census, just making sure. And that's the main thing, really strengthening our proposal to the city council. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fuentes. Commissioner Marshman and then Commissioner Lizotte. Commissioner Marshman.
Linda, would you like to go first in case a question for me, and then I can take care of everybody?
Sure. No, it's not really a question, but I'll make my comment. Initially, I was opposed to Barbara's initial thought of increasing by no more than 2, because I just don't think that increasing the city council is appropriate at this time. I think it's a false narrative to suggest that by increasing the number of council members, you get better representation out of the council members. That's just a false narrative. I represented 85,000 people, and my staff and I did it very well. And I had a very diverse community, and so it I've said this before. It comes down to leadership. You can have 75 council members, for a population of 1 million, and if the council member doesn't want to work, then the constituency is not going to be represented. And I think that's more the problem than how many council members there are. And so, having said that, I think that Barbara's memo sort of strikes the right tone in that let the next commission or the council take a look at what the redistricting committee does with redistricting in the city, and how are those boundaries drawn? Are they splitting communities of color? Are they splitting certain ethnicities? Is there merging of communities that were split before? I think doing it before the redistricting commission does their work and sets up the new boundaries for the city is problematic. And so I think Barbara's way of looking at it, of wait to see what redistricting does, and then have the commission in the future look at the issue of do we really need more council members? And I think that question needs to be answered by either council or the redistricting committee. Is it about more representation or better representation? Those are two different things. And I think that it's about better representation, and that may come out of how the redistricting works out. Maybe you're going to get better candidates who represent the constituency where they live, and perhaps that's going to make for better candidates in some of these council districts. So I'm getting to the point of repeating myself, but I support Barbara's way of addressing this question and putting it off to after redistricting.
Thank you, Commissioner Lazat. Commissioner Marchman.
Yes, first of all, I have not talked to communities of interest that oppose this. This has not been out really in the public as an active proposal, as far as I know. And while it's true, I'm not a disadvantaged in a disadvantaged classification, I certainly know what it's like to not be represented by a particular council member. I won't go into that, but I've often not agreed with things that were happening. And some of them I wrote about, and some of them I didn't. But we don't know. And my point in raising, find out, I think we need to do the outreach and see if people think that. It is absolutely true that more districts may not improve representation. They could just make, they might improve representation in that they would focus on narrower cross sections of the community. But that can have its downside. It can also lead to more of what we would think of as a NIMBY attitude of, I'm protecting my district. This is a small district. I'm and we're not going to compromise. And to get anything done in a city or a nation, you really need the ability to compromise. And concerns about getting too large too quickly is that might be the tendency to be insular, could be greater, and that's both for disadvantaged communities of interest, and for others. I think, oh, and there's plenty of time to do this study and get it to the ballot before the 2030 census. There's plenty of time to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hui Tran.
Thank you. This is actually more of a procedural question. I think this may be more appropriately directed towards Mark Vanny. Can we approve a recommendation that, can we approve a memo that actually does not propose any kind of change to the charter and is rather just more of a, hey, this is something the city should look at?
Yes, under the authority to consider other measures that would include policy matters as well as ordinance changes, charter amendments, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. That's all my question was.
All right, any other commissioner want to speak to this issue? Commissioner Monley.
Yeah, I just really want to underscore what Commissioner Lazat said. I think this is really an issue. Better representation is something many of us feel we want within our districts at different times for different reasons. And it's not really a matter of the size of the district. It is, again, whether the council member wants to work or not. So this really goes to the ballot box and who your council members are, that are who your candidates are for council, for your district council. So I would also say that this is something that is should be dealt with within the council offices, and maybe increase it by 2, because there are some areas that are extremely large, and the Berryessa area was one that was mentioned, is a changing district with business going in and with residential there as well, and trying to be something. That may need to be a different 2 different districts, but certainly not a big overhaul of many, many districts. I think we need to look at the candidates for council and make our demands as the public upon them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Monley. Commissioner Sanchez.
Yeah, just one final thing. I think maybe we ought to take a survey of the staff for each of the council members and ask the staff themselves what they deal with, because if you ask the staff about the hundreds and hundreds of calls that they field and the issues that they're trying to resolve on behalf of their council person, I think you would start getting an idea there in terms of the tremendous workload that they're under. And again, because of the size of the district and how they've grown so much over the last several decades, and so I think that might be one way to move forward with this topic, is to ask the people who are right in the middle of things, ask them what kind of workload that they're under, trying to resolve all the issues, all the problems that come up on a daily basis, and it's considerable. And just one issue, let's say the homeless issue, takes a lot of time. Just that one issue itself. That doesn't include all the other numerous issues that are out there that confront our city council people every day. But I think we definitely get some good feedback from the staff themselves in terms of the workload that they're under, because they just can't finish. That's the bottom line. Meaning they really can't represent all over 100,000 people in that particular district. That's why the proposal, I favor, is that we do increase our city council. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. Commissioner Percival.
Thanks. I agree with some of what's been said here. I do recognize that representation very much hinges on who's in office and leadership and those kinds of things. You could certainly have someone who gets elected who checks out, and they probably won't be in office for very long because they'll get voted out. But at the same time, I think that either consciously or unconsciously, that elected officials ask themselves, who votes for me, or who turns out to vote. And I think that even within large districts, as they're currently designed, you could have inequities in participation even within a district. This is particularly true because of things like, as members of the community have brought up many times, things like redlining in decades past, where you still have a lot of segregation within a district. So I think that, one of the things that at least I'm hearing is that there's still a lot of people who feel unrepresented in this system, that potentially increasing the size of districts will create a structural incentive for our city council members to think more carefully about who's in their district, who votes for them, who votes regularly. I think it could address some of the inequities. At the same time, there is a real concern about, I think, narrow self-interest, particularly in things like housing, which disproportionately affects communities of color and getting access to affordable housing and blocking development where it's badly needed. So there's a lot of things to think about here, but I just get a sense that many members of the community may not have super strong opinions on this because it's kind of a technical issue, but when you bring the larger questions about representation to them, there seems to be a lot of support for change. So I just want to leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Percival. Commissioner Marshman and then Commissioner Posadas.
I just had to note that the idea of overworked staff getting way too many phone calls they can't deal with, this would be an example of a way to look at improving equity, equal access, and responsiveness. More staff and maybe higher salaries for more specialized or competent staff. I'm not saying I believe 2 more districts would be a good thing for us to do, but there are other ways to improve service and improve outreach. And there's a wide disparity now in the council districts. Some do it well and some don't. And they're all the same size and they're all big.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshman. Commissioner Posadas and then Commissioner He-Tran.
Yes, I just wanted to kind of echo some of the comments from Commissioner Sanchez, because even though there are 10 city council districts, not all 10 districts are equal. Some are obviously in need of more services, more resources. And while you may have one, for example, one council district with, say, 10 neighborhood associations, in another district, you might have 30 neighborhood associations, which is great for neighborhood participation. But the reason they are most likely participating is because they have more issues and more concerns within their neighborhoods. And so that's the reason why having increased city council, both council members and council staff, would help to help with resolving some of those issues that are not being met right now in the community. So not all council districts are the same. Some are just quite more busy than others, and that's the reason why I would think that adding the size to the city council would help in that way.
Thank you, Commissioner Hui-Tran.
Yeah, thank you. So the way I'm understanding what's being proposed is that is not a firm decision on saying, hey, let's expand by 2 seats. What it's saying is let's put the time into it to determine how much of an expansion we need and have a proposal ready before the 2030 census. Is that right? Okay, thank you. And what I'm hearing from those who want to see more immediate changes, we got to pick something kind of number and move towards expansion now. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding and hearing the different arguments correctly here. But one point I bring up that was just related to Berryessa, because I've heard it kind of brought it up twice. I mean, if we look in the Berryessa district or District 4 more broadly, right? There's a clear difference. You can see a clear difference between 2 different areas of the district. The eastern side of the district is definitely much more populated, right? The heart of Berryessa is Berryessa. But when we start looking at Alviso and North San Jose, the nature of those neighborhoods starts changing pretty dramatically. And also, too, a lot of the changes that are going to happen in the coming years may center around the North First Corridor, can center around the Berryessa BART station. You know, a lot of these changes are going to come, and I definitely think we have to put some intentional thought into what redistricting look like, and it may impact District 4. But it would, you know, but to be honest with you, I mean, at some point too, I can say that the current map, I don't know if the current map allows for these different neighborhoods to have their voices heard the same way. I mean, I'm sure many folks know Alviso has constantly felt that it has been left out of the conversation for a lot of things that happen in the city. I'm just sharing some perspective. I'm still processing on which proposal, which approach is the better way to go. But it sounds like so far there's this consensus on looking at the quality of representation on the city.
Thank you, Mr. Trent. Mr. Callender.
All right, good evening, everyone. So I wanted to wait and hear a little perspective on this and want to provide mine. You know, the time for justice, equality, and inclusion has always been put back. When I heard Commissioner Tran talk about 2030, that's basically 9 years from now. Our existing redistricting committee for the city of San Jose will have a decision, and we'll have the districts redrawn before the beginning of this new year or early in the new year, so that people will know what districts that they're running in for the 2022 elections. I would really encourage us to move this along now. It's pretty obvious that smaller districts will be written around the neighborhoods of interest, and therefore you will get a more diverse city council. I heard a lot of folks talk about, you know, how many folks they've represented, how many folks that the existing council members represent. I've heard folks say that they'll vote people out if they're not representing. And that's the case. You have certain council members, and we all know this, that work harder than others. It doesn't matter if their districts would double their size, they still would be out there hustling and being able to get representation done. This is not about representation. This is about equality and justice from where I sit. And the only way to get equality and justice is not to wait, is to move this along, and to move at least along a decision, so that if this does make it on the ballot in November or June or whenever it goes on, that they can look to make those changes in the near future and to redistrict and to create additional council districts that would have better representation for the smaller districts. So I'm not going to give folks a pass and saying, let's give people help because they need extra help because of the growing communities. What I'm talking about is equality and fair representation on the council from all different communities. So if we get smaller districts, you'll have better representation of what's in those smaller districts, because it will look like who they believe should be representing them. That's where I stand.
Thank you, Mr. Callender. Mr. Fuentes.
So I'm searching for a timeline. Thank you, Commissioner Callender, for your urgency and your comments. And I agree that that we need to move forward, and there should not be a delay in doing this. And I suppose, Commissioner Callender, you were thinking that the current redistricting commission continues as is with their work to draw the lines for the 10 districts that currently exist. And then at the same time, we move forward with a recommendation for adding more city council districts, put that on the ballot. When and if that passes, then those lines are redrawn then. I don't see you. I don't know if that's what you meant, but
that is exactly what I meant.
Okay, so then thank you. And I think that makes, like, you know, that is what I agree with as well, and it makes perfect sense. You know, when this first came forward, I believe it was Commissioner Posadas that first introduced the concept, where we have we've actually doubled in size since our lines were drawn. And I couldn't even imagine going from 10 to 20 to make up that change. But I think it seems to be common belief that we need to do more. We need to have more seats and better representation. And I was also going to suggest that working in this area would be the perfect place for the Office of let's see, I'm trying to get the correct name, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, to be involved, because we really have to figure out what is the right number, what is the right number is actually what we need more than anything. I know that I cannot imagine having 20 city council seats, and I'm not saying we would go there, but we do have to do the research to really see what is it that we're trying to accomplish in our city. And I lament constantly what has happened in our city and the inequity. And pretty soon, when we all received, some of us received the 2021 Silicon Valley Index that shows the disparities and how bad they are. We'll be seeing more information along those lines soon. And so we know that this area needs to be addressed, and this is a good way to do it. And, the final thing, we were talking about Berryessa, and I live in District 8, and I'm sure all our districts have undergone a lot of change. I don't believe that we'll get to have 20 seats, but we have to find the right number in order to achieve the inclusion and equity that should be our goal. I also want to add that it would be good to hear, and I don't know if any of us have been following, but it would be good to hear what the redistricting committee is looking at, how they're facing the challenge of creating lines, redrawing the lines, and promoting the inclusion and the democratic opportunities for our city within the 10 districts that we have. I would love to hear what they're experiencing and what they would like to see in this area as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Marshman.
I'm fine with going with something sooner. There's just a lot of cost involved, and you would have to get districts drawn. The districts that are being drawn now would have to be in place, I believe, for the for next year's elections. And then if there's a decision to do something faster than 2030, you could do that. I do think, there is a fair amount of research to do to figure out. It may seem intuitive that more council members equals better representation. I would like to talk to some folks, and obviously Denver has concluded that it will be. I would like to understand how some of the larger council places work. So I would just, because it's a major change, and it would change the whether it's 2 or 4 or whatever council members, any little bit is going to change the dynamic tremendously in City Hall. And I think we need time to look at that and not just toss out a number and say we're going to do this by the 2024 election, although it probably would be possible to.
Thank you. Commissioner Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you. I also want to echo the concerns of Commissioner Marshman and Fuentes. I think this is something that we need more time and resources so we can fully research this and do our due diligence. It's a huge issue, and we were given this maybe a month ago. And so we haven't been able to focus the time that we needed to really fully vet this idea out. I know for our subcommittees, we were concerned about throwing a number out. And so if we can talk to redistricting to understand more of where their head is, that would be greatly appreciated. So I don't know if there's any way we can set that up to have them present or have someone talk to us in our subcommittee. We would appreciate that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson. I'll talk to our consultant and our city clerk staff about that, and if that's possible. Commissioner Percival.
And just a question for Attorney Vanny. It is possible, if I'm not mistaken, to do sort of a mid-decade redistricting, right? There's nothing in the law against that. Santa Clara did that.
You're
Went through
correct,
that process. What's that?
Yes, there's nothing in the law that prohibits it. You would just use the census data that you have available. So we'd use the 2020 census for that purpose.
Right. Okay, great.
Commissioner Zhao.
Thank you. I would like to echo Commissioner Johnson. I think this issue is really big and we are giving very limited time. We need more time. We also need to talk to the redistricting commission to understand where they are. And we are proposing a charter amendment that could possibly change the mayor council structures. So all this together, I do think there's no way that we propose a number and a change for the next election. So I would like more time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Calendar.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the largest mid-year redistricting that I'm aware of was with the Santa Clara Valley Water District in 2009. I was part of the process when Joe Cotto's bill, AB 466, ordered the redistricting of the entire Santa Clara Valley Water District. We had 5 districts and we had to do 7, and then had to actually do redistricting 2 years subsequent to that in order to make way for the decennial census for redistricting. So yes, it's possible. Yes, it can be done. What's the right number? I don't know, but I'm going to argue that 10 districts isn't right. And that even if we add on by 2, that may be right. It can definitely be done. But the redistricting that's going on existing, that won't be affected by any decision that we make because it will already be done. The districts will already be written. What I'm saying is to redistrict the entire city to add on X amount of seats. But I think I'd love to kick it back to the committee. And if the committee want me to talk about my experience with AB 466 or folks that were involved, I'd be happy to. And talk about how we definitely got it done. There is a path.
Thank you, Commissioner Calendar. And I would advise the subcommittee, you just got a volunteer, so you may want to take up Commissioner Calendar on his offer. Most generous. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to move us to our next item. Thank you for that lively discussion. I'm going to move us to our next recommendation from the subcommittee. And I believe it's Vice Chair Johnson is going to be presenting our next item.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to be sharing my screen. Hopefully I don't run into too many technical issues doing that. Okay, so I had the topic of looking into whether we should expand mayoral powers. And after careful consideration and evaluation and research, I think it's best that we stay with the council manager format. And I have this graph here that was provided for us by the city of what our current responsibility for our council and our manager and our mayor is. And I think, we talk a lot about equity and inclusion and representation, and I just don't see how expanding the mayoral powers is going to really help us with that. Just based on the discussions that we've heard today, council members represent their districts. They're usually the first point of access for residents. So they go to their council members to help address their issues. And if their council members are limited in their power, how are they going to be able to address their issue? And that trust is also going to be eroded in the community. We've talked about how there is a huge income gap. There's a social capital gap. We've had historically disenfranchised residents who feel like they don't have a voice at the table. So I think that's why it's important that we stay with a council manager format. So changing to a mayor council form of governance will siphon the already pre-existing democratic power of the council to one person, the mayor. which will decrease overall equitable representation, accountability, and inclusion, which will conflict with our Council Directive 5, which was to look into measures to increase representation, diversity, and equity. In terms of my proposed amendments, I do want to increase representation. And I think one way for us to do that is to expand the nomination powers of the entire council so that they can put forward nominees for the city manager position. I think from this 7 months that we've gone through this whole process, we've learned how important the city manager role is. So it makes sense that more voices should be at the table when we're hiring for such an important role for our city. And the reasons why I think this should be it would be allowing the entire council to submit, if they chose to, or to back another council member's nomination, will foster collaboration and ensure equitable representation by allowing council members to submit and applicants that align with their constituents' values. And this will help us fulfill our 5th council directive, which is consider additional measures and potential charter amendments as needed that will improve accountability, representation, and inclusion at City Hall. So that is my very short presentation. I welcome any feedback.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson. And we'll go now to the public to comment on this set of proposals. Clerk can call the first speaker.
Tessa Woodmansey.
Thank you. Yes, well, I think the issue, I guess we're coming down the line in regards to the political agendas that were part of this Charter Review Commission. But like I've been saying is that we haven't given enough time to the people's agenda. So that I did write a letter about that, and I hope that gets addressed so that we really put time on the critical issues that address the people's accountability and safety and issues like that. But in specific, so I want there to be more time put onto those agendas, and I keep seeing that that's not happening, and now we're making decisions about the political stuff, and we're coming towards the end of this commission, so that's a concern of mine, and it hasn't been addressed, so please work on that. But in addition, the issue that's at hand here about the strong mayor, I am very against the strong mayor. We see where it came from. When Mayor Liccardo wanted that strong mayor control was when he wanted to send the workers back into the workforce under the our COVID pandemic. And he didn't take a little stock. And so when he, that was where it came from. He wanted that, people, all the council, all the construction trades wanted that one, neck to choke, and that would be a mayor where they could have control, and therefore, ironically, well, literally, what happened is that our building code enforcement and construction, whatever, the head, Rosalind Huey, had to fight back the mayor, saying, no, I want to protect the people in terms of our public health. And so these are the kind of things that the strong.
Roland.
Thank you. So let me start by saying that I strongly agree with every single one of Commissioner Johnson's words. But what I want you to consider is what was behind putting this proposal on the table in the first place. And I will put it to you, there is a very strong possibility that our mayor became frustrated with a bunch of council members who are essentially retiring on the job as soon as they get elected, which is a conversation that you just had under the previous item. Thank you.
Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. This is could be a real big one to be considering. First, a thank you for the previous item and just all the efforts that I'm hearing about the concepts of what can be our future of good participatory democracy. It's really nice to hear. Thank you. for this issue. You know, we've had to be dealing with the flood issues and COVID issues. Each at the beginnings of those processes, we were very disorganized and confused how the structure of government should work. And you know, for as much as the person on this item has described, we cannot do these practices. There are other forms that we have that is basically what I felt was the beginning of this charter process was about. And it was described in the beginning. How can the mayor have strong mayor power to offer some sort of procedural purpose to council and city manager decision making? That needed to be better defined. And it's just small, simple procedural matters and matters of Brown Act and matters of how to practice, you know, good government counsel at the time of, say, an emergency. That's the stuff I want to be able to work on. We have upcoming earthquake issues to address that, you know, the work that I do with accountability with technology and its open public policy ideas and the Sunshine Ordinance ideas of San Jose from 2007, it can be an incredible starting point for us all. How we have to consider these sort of things I'm talking about and never, ever go to the strong mayor representing the future of development. Let's not go there. Let's talk about the strong mayor as procedural for city council.
Alina?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, for that proposal. I agree that we should not move to the strong mayor system. I also agree with what Blair has brought up many times during public comment that, you know, in the case of an emergency, which is what prompted this whole situation and conversation last summer, that we need to have better procedural protocols for when an emergency does happen. And if anything, that what happened last summer and with the flooding, it just showed that we're not very well prepared for emergencies. And that is a city staff department and a collective issue rather than just figuring out who should have the ultimate power to speak and tell or make decisions. It should be collectively, how are we responding to this emergency? And collectively, how are we taking care of our community? And I also agree that expanding the nomination powers to the city manager would be much better and provide more quality candidates that are more representative. And, you know, it is a very important decision to hire. It's a very important position to hire for. And the more robust conversation and candidates that we can have and nominations, regardless if they all each nominate or support each other, it's better than just having one nomination coming from only one filter, which is the mayor. And so I agree with both of these recommendations. And again, just echoing that I think for emergency powers that we need to have better emergency procedures and preparedness rather than just handing over the reins to one person to decide, a person that doesn't have emergency training or, you know, disaster training. And so that would be something else to consider about that. Thank you.
Paul Soto?
Yes. Thank you, Paul Soto. Honestly, I don't care what any of you guys do because it's almost like predetermined. Give an example of what I mean by that. And it pains this because I respect his logic and I respect some of the things that he's brought to the council. But this charter commission was founded on Len Depp electing himself. Now, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm the ignorant one that I need a class in ethics, political ethics. Okay, maybe I'm the stupid one in the room. All right, I'll just leave it alone. Secondly, is strong mayor, why did it have to be qualified? Why did we have to say strong mayor? The word "you" has to be checked because it implies a perspective of, but it's almost like tainted from the start because you're suggesting something. This is called, within the context of a courtroom, I got a lot of experience. I got 38 years in the system. That's called a leading question. You're already leading the person to believe something that is very subjective. It's not an objective question. What an objective question would be, is it, timer, okay, is that you want to consolidate power within the mayor's office. Now, as dangerous as we've seen this man operate, Ricardo, a Jesuit, this dude has decimated this city. Let me give you a statistic. 95% to 115% of market rate housing in the last 6 years. At the same time, only increased above 20%.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Items for discussion, feedback, questions. Commissioner Gilman.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, for your presentation. And I agree overall with the recommendations that you've presented. I did have a question, though, on the expanding the nomination process to allow council members to make nominations. And I guess the question is, when Dave Sykes announced his resignation, his retirement, I sort of envisioned this nationwide search for a top flight city manager. And the council chose to go with Jennifer McGuire, which that's fine. She's probably very qualified. I don't know much about her, but I just wonder, would the typical council member really have a pool of candidates from which they could make the nominations from? It's not like we're nominating people within districts or necessarily within the city. And did you guys talk about that when you formulated that aspect of the recommendation?
Commissioner Johnson, you want to respond? Go ahead.
Yes. So no, unfortunately, we didn't look at that, or I didn't look at that in terms of nomination, but I think that is a really good point, and I would want to research that further and look into it.
Commissioner Azat.
Christina, could you put up the very first slide you had with the chart? Would that be difficult?
Yes, let me, actually, yeah, it might be because I closed the window to prepare for yours.
Oh, sorry about that.
No
So
worries.
I think it listed where San Jose is currently. And I think it said mayor council, didn't it?
Yes.
So
wait.
you're not suggesting changing that.
No, I'm saying we stay
Okay.
council manager.
No, I think we're okay. What are we now?
We're council manager.
Okay, all right. My second question is goes to Mr. Gilman's question, and your recommendation that the city council also put in nominations for the interview process. I think that's what you're saying, so that when they go to look for a city manager, it's just not the mayor controlling it, that the council have the ability to say, hey, go interview this person. Is that what you're suggesting? Christina?
Yes. I'm sorry. Linda, can you please repeat that? I was trying to open up the presentation.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. So what you're suggesting is that right now it's just the mayor who sort of controls the search for a manager if there's a replacement, and you're suggesting that the council have the ability to be part of that in nominating people to be interviewed for that position as well, so they have some input. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to share with everybody at the water district, we did that. Normally, it's just we let a search committee when we're looking for a chief executive officer or higher. And this time we had board members also put in names and suggestions, just not leave it to the search committee. And it actually worked out better, I think, because each board member had somebody that they had worked with and wanted to interview. As you all know, Mr. Calendar won the day, but the ability for the board members to participate, I think, made it a lot more inclusive in the sense of we were able to bring in our knowledge to the process. And so I agree with your recommendation to have the council be involved in being able to nominate people to be interviewed for city manager, and not just leaving it to the mayor or some search committee. So I agree with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lazat. Commissioner Marshman?
Sorry, actually, I do not have a question. My question's been resolved.
Thank you, Commissioner Quay-Tran.
Thank you. Just a clarifying question, because I'm looking ahead towards Commissioner Lazat's memo. With the statements made by Vice Chair Johnson, is this memo intended to be exclusive of Commissioner Lazat's proposal to expand mayoral emergency powers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I did just want to clarify, and maybe I misunderstood. I think we intend to bring forward both memos, right? That the commission could approve both Commissioner Vice Chair Johnson's memo and Commissioner Lazat's memo, and that Commissioner Vice Chair Johnson's memo would not supersede Commissioner Lazat's memo.
That's correct.
Okay, just
well, we're going to hear that next. Commissioner Lund, yep.
Yes, thank
Oh, Len, you're on mute.
Can you hear me? I wrote a memo previously, so I'm publicly on record about supporting strengthening the mayor's role. So I'm a minority on the committee on this. So I'll just reiterate, my view that I don't agree with the contrasting narrative that empowering more of a mayoral role would take away from the city council's role. I think it's different. It's a contrast between diminishing the city manager's role and taking those authorities and those powers and putting it onto a single individual who was elected citywide. And I may be the minority on this commission, or I certainly was on the subcommittee, but that's still my belief. I do think that as we have our mayor envisioned now, and with listening to this commission and the tendency to be more collective in decision making, it doesn't make sense to me to have a mayor who I think, at least in my vision, it does not have a role for him or herself that is something that they can achieve within their own staff and effort. Even the mayor, as I see it, gets to hold the gavel in meetings, gets to do the State of the Union, the State of the City address, and gets to write the draft of the city budget that the council votes up or down. But in any one of those instances, the mayor, I've seen the mayor say, we're going to put a 5-minute limit on council member comments because we have a lot of public speakers and a lengthy agenda. And council members can say, I want to put that to a vote, and I don't want a time limit. And that has been pushed back on, and we've had the mayor lose those kind of votes. So even procedurally, this current mayor, but a future mayor, does not really control the council in any meaningful way because he or she does not really have that authority enshrined in our city charter. So I'm just thinking that there needs to be a lane for the mayor to do something because he or she is elected citywide. And short of that, they're just a council member at large. And what is the big deal about citywide elections and all the money that goes into it? We could just as well go back to the systems where other cities do it, where the mayor rotates every other year or every year, because it is basically running the meeting and getting to cut the ribbon and getting the press to come to them first before for other issues. So I do think as a big city, our mayor should have some lane, whatever authority that is specific to that role, separate and apart from the city council. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full-on quote unquote strong mayor, but I think there needs to be a role eked out. And I hear this commission talking about, more representation and more city council seats. And that's something that I would support. That tendency, though, is as we lift up other voices that aren't being heard, we are in a way dialing down and kind of this is not the right word, but as we uplift other groups, we are kind of dividing and withdrawing into more specialized opinions, viewpoints, needs. And there needs to be a countervailing force that unites us as a city. So is our political unit the district level? Is our political unit the city level? As we have 17, 20, 25 city council seats, you're going to have neighborhoods really put at the forefront the things that are important to them within a 2-mile radius of where they live. And you need another countervailing force, someone who's citywide elected, who sits and says, as a city, we can't do that. We need to do something that's better for the city as a whole. And that's, in my mind, what a citywide elected official would do. Council members I've seen, people say they're mini mayors or whatever. Council members need to get reelected. They need to do the work in their community. But sometimes the desires of a particular district are countervailing to the larger needs of the city as a whole. And we've seen this with housing. We've seen this with other things. And so there's a tension there. Council members are beholden to their electorate. And the mayor is beholden to the city as a whole. So I just put that out there for thought, and I look forward to the continued discussion.
Thank you, Councilman Gipp. Councilmember Percival? Commissioner, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to Commissioner Johnson and the rest of the subcommittee for this proposal. I know it's been a lot of work. I was just curious whether maybe you could tell the whole commission a little bit more about your thought process and things that you studied, and just in brief. I'm wondering specifically if your discussions included some of the other proposals that were either have moved on or continuing to talk about. One specifically, moving the timing of the mayoral election, which would dramatically expand sort of the breadth of participation in mayoral elections. And given that we do expect to see an increase in racial and ethnic diversity in the electorate, whether that had any part of your discussion in your decision in this particular proposal. The other one too I'm thinking about is policing, where there's a lot of evidence that suggests that the mayor, that they have more power to hire or fire a police chief, or those mayors are actually more likely to be responsive to community concerns about police misuse of force. I think it was Commissioner Lazat way earlier last spring, I think, who made a great point. I think that this is we're a council manager form of government, but really we're more an adapted city where the city over time has given the mayor some more power in certain areas. And it looks like the next proposal is sort of in that context, in that line. So I guess I was just throw it back to the subcommittee to educate us in the sense of whether you thought about these other sort of proposals and how they influence your thinking on this.
I think there was definitely some consideration of other proposals and how it would impact the overall process. I think for me, though, it was also listening to, presentations from past mayor like Ron Gonzalez, and then having more of a discussion in our subcommittee about what Mayor Reed was able to pass. And it was all through collaboration. And so that's why it's like, well, we need more of that, not less of that, right? And it's also thinking about why this issue came to the table in the first place. I don't remember any previous mayors wanting more power. So that goes back to why this issue was brought to us in the first place. And then in terms of policing, we did kind of talk about it, but we talked more broadly about department chairs and how they should be hired. They should be hired from their experience, and we were concerned that if a department chair was hired, like the mayor had hiring and firing ability, how do you take politics out of that? So that was one thing that was discussed. And I don't know if my other subcommittee members want to chime in with their thoughts.
Commissioner Percival, it would be great if you are able to pass along the research you referenced regarding mayors who have hiring and firing power with being more responsive around, I believe you said it was complaints of abuse of force by police. I'd be curious whether that research sort of separated out other aspects of the strong mayor's power. Like, I don't know if there are cities where they're a hybrid and that's the only sort of piece of strong mayor that the mayor has. I mean, I think, I guess I would just underscore what Vice Chair Johnson was saying, is that overall we felt that the presenters that we had as a commission had made a pretty strong case that there's a lot that's possible given the current powers of the mayor, and the mayor working effectively with the city council and staff. So I think that was just sort of a conclusion that moved us across a variety of considerations.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to share some of the stuff that I have with the subcommittee or whoever else would like to see it. Yeah, I guess I was just gonna, encourage us. And I don't have strong positions on this particular issue. I'm just trying to get us, thinking, I think forward and what the city might look like. I know a lot of people's positions, at least from public comment, seem to be tied on the strong mayor, seem to be tied to their opinions about Liccardo to some extent, which is natural, and I totally understand that. But I'm just, I guess, just encouraging us to think about, what would the mayor look like, in the future if we also made some other changes. So, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I've definitely observed a big disconnect between what members of the public think the mayor can do and what the mayor really can do. So I am sympathetic to the whole idea of examining the mayoral powers. One of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years is that a lot of the power actually resides in the Rules Committee. They act as the gatekeeper for what items go before the council and what's on the agenda. I believe there are 4 members of the council that are appointed to the Rules Committee now. I'm not sure if the mayor makes those appointments or not. Perhaps one of our former council members here on this commission might be able to elaborate on that. But the question for the subcommittee is, when you were considering mayoral powers, did you look at the mayor's power vis-a-vis appointments to the Rules Committee?
We did not look at the Rules Committee, so that is something that we can study more.
Commissioner Segal.
Thank you. One of the things that I had studied was League of Women Voters. We had the League of Women Voters come on and give us a bunch of homework, and the homework was reading. There was a whole bunch of reading that they were doing as part of their recommendations on what we're doing. And so I just wanted everyone to know that I did that reading, and that reading was against giving more powers to the mayor. And so just wanted to remind everybody of that earlier time when the League of Women Voters asked us to do those readings.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshman.
Well, first of all, the league, as far as I know, ended up making their position more flexible in the end. I was a little surprised. I'm a member, and I should be up on this, but I'm not entirely. But I think because so many large cities move in this direction, I believe they wanted to leave themselves flexibility, but not in this case. And I would not want to see. First of all, I will apologize. I've had a bad summer with death in the family and a lot of complications around that. And so I missed a couple of our committee meetings, including the one in which we discussed, or the committee discussed Christina's memo, which in general, I totally support. She really framed it all well. I still wish there were a little more of a consensus to give the mayor more ability to one thing is hire and fire the police chief, because I do think it has become so clear with the demonstrations weekly at Sam LaCarter's house for months after the George Floyd demonstrations, when people clearly felt the mayor was the person who was at fault here, and I think a police chief does. I think a police chief who is reporting to the mayor is more likely to be politically sensitive and to be concerned about some of the things that might concern an elected official, which is to say some of the things that people care about. So I just wanted to toss out, and I actually would have supported doing the same with the city manager, and trying, particularly if we're going to expand the city council, to give the mayor a little more executive authority, but not wholesale. I think generally we need to stay roughly where we are, but I would support putting the police chief under the mayor with the concurrence of the city council, just like San Diego does. It is different. It is a different dynamic, but the city council down there does have the last say on if the mayor wants to hire someone or fire someone. The council can veto either. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Sagan, Commissioner Gilman, are your hands up for a reason? No, thank you, thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Lund, yep.
Yeah, just to address Commissioner Gilman's point, the mayor does have the authority to appoint committee assignments to all council members, but I believe there was a memo from a council member trying to make that more of a consensus process where council members get to select their favorite committees, and I'm not sure where that went, but as far as last year, the mayor does do that.
City Attorney Vanny, did you want to comment?
Yes, I could just clarify that did go through, and now I believe that the Rules Committee is appointed by the council consensus. And the mayor no longer sits on the Rules Committee.
Any other thoughts, feedback, questions? Seeing none, I'm going to go to our fourth and final presentation tonight on the recommendation from the subcommittee. And I'm going to ask that to be presented by Commissioner Lazat.
Thank you, Chair. Christina, could you share your screen with my slides, please? Since I'm unable to do so on my computer. So these are just a couple of slides. Obviously, I'm going to talk about granting emergency powers to the mayor. Next slide, please. So these are two events that took place that gave rise to my thinking. One was the flooding and the other was the protest. Next slide, please. So under section 8.8200 of the municipal code, vests the city manager as director of the Office of Emergency Services with the power to declare an emergency and marshal all of the city assets subject to later ratification of the city council. In February of 2017 with regard to the flooding, and in May of 2020 with regard to the protest, declarations of emergency were declared by the city manager. In both instances, there were alleged failures of leadership before and during the emergencies, with no elected leader directly responsible for deployment of city resources. Next slide, please. In both instances, the mayor was available. As everyone knows, the mayor is the very visible leader of the city. Citizens in both instances look to the mayor for leadership, authority, and accountability. And we are pressed with looking at ways of changing the charter to deal with accountability. But power to marshal assets and manage the crisis rested with the city manager. My proposal calls for a charter change to give the mayor the ability to issue an emergency declaration and to have all of the powers currently vested in the non-elected city manager. The mayor is accountable to the public and as such should be accountable to them in times of disaster and emergencies. Last week during our subcommittee, there were some issues and questions raised, and so I want to continue on hoping to address those issues. So as I said, what I'm suggesting is adding additional power to the city charter. Under city charter section 500, that sets for 502, that sets forth all of the powers of the mayor. So I'm suggesting that we add 502.1, or L rather, to give the mayor the power to declare an emergency as set forth in my memo. This power, as I said, currently vests with the city manager. Now, the way it vests with the city manager right now is the manager can request an emergency declaration if the council is in session. If they are not in session, then he or she can declare the emergency. The municipal code sets forth the powers of the manager to protect the health and welfare of people and property. And they're pretty broad and basically general in nature. This declaration doesn't go on forever. In fact, the manager must seek ratification of their declaration within 7 days from the city council, or else it expires. And if it's ratified, it can be extended for another 30 days by the council, and multiple times it can be extended by the city council for 30 days. So one of the issues was, how does the mayor do this? And is he taking a walk on the wild side by him or herself? So the mayor doesn't act in a vacuum. Right now, the municipal code spells out an emergency services council, of which the mayor, the city manager, and the appropriate emergency services personnel meet to recommend to council emergency and mutual aid plans and agreements. And they meet as called by the chair of that emergency council. And that's just a standing committee. There is also the Office of Emergency Services, and the city manager serves as director of the emergency services during most times. And it is the duty of the city manager currently to proclaim emergencies. But the Office of Emergency Services just doesn't deal with declarations of emergencies. There's all sorts of things that the emergency services does that don't require declaration, just making sure that the roads are open and a lot of different things that you would think of. My memo, however, moves this power over to the mayor, who must have a declaration ratified by the council within 72 hours or as soon as practical. And that language is in there because, if it's a major catastrophe, the mayor declares the emergency, and it may take 72, 74, 75 hours to get a majority of the council together. And so you want to have that leeway. You just don't want to have a hard stop at 72 hours. So it's as soon as practical, or else it expires. So it needs to come to the council within a reasonable amount of time, specifically 72 hours. If it's ratified, then it also can be extended multiple times per the Muni Code by a majority council vote. Now, the mayor would have all of the assets of the city, all of the departments, the DOT, emergency services at his ready. And he would also have all of the personnel in the emergency services unit and department to rely on to help in whether or not emergency should be declared. In San Francisco and Los Angeles, the mayor's office actually has a small unit that advises the mayor with regard to whether or not to make that declaration. But they work in concert with the emergency services manager in each of those cities. Also, there was a discussion within the committee about 72 hours. Is 72 hours too long? Is it too short? So I looked up some of the other cities that I looked at to make this recommendation. New York City at 72 hours, and it expires after 5 days unless it's ratified. In Los Angeles, it's 7 days, like it is currently with the city manager here. San Francisco, it's as soon as possible. Seattle, it's 48 hours. So those were the big cities. I also looked at some smaller cities. Toppenish, Washington, it's 72 hours. And in Laurel, Maryland, it's 48 hours. When I last met with the committee, we sort of decided 72 hours was probably appropriate based on New York and some of the other cities. So that's my recommendation to, again, move the ability to declare an emergency to the mayor. As I said, people look to the mayor for accountability. And as we saw with the protests and also with the flooding, that's who people were looking for for responsibility and accountability. And if people are going to look there, the mayor should have the ability to make that declaration and deal with the consequences politically.
Thank you, Commissioner Lazat. Questions, thoughts, feedback from the public first, and we will go to our first speaker.
Robert Brownstein.
Good evening. This proposal is very seriously flawed. Let's look at the details. Who decides whether there's a sufficient emergency that the mayor should have this power? The mayor. The mayor is not required to consult with anybody. What standard does the mayor have to apply? He or she has to say in writing that they want the power. That's it. If there's a garbage can burning somewhere, the mayor can say it's a state of emergency and we have to have the police aggressively break up demonstrations. The mayor will have that power. There's nothing in this charter amendment that stops that. What this should say is the mayor has to get approval from as many council members as can be reached before that power is granted. How long does the power last? 72 hours or as practicable? Who decides what's practicable? The measure doesn't say. Does the mayor decide? Does the council decide? Life and death decisions are being made. The lawsuits are piling up and nobody knows who can answer the question how long this mayoral power lasts. How much power are we giving the mayor? All of the power of the city manager on everything in the city, regardless of whether that power is needed to deal with the emergency. If there's a flood in District 3, why does the mayor need the ability to make a decision on code enforcement in Evergreen? Why do we need to give the mayor the authority to fire the housing director because there's a flood in District 3? What we need, if you're going to move in this direction, and increasingly I don't think you should, is narrowly defining the scope of the mayor's power and the nature of the emergency. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Tessa? Tessa Woodmansey?
Yes, thank you. Okay, good. The clock should start when I start. Anyway, basically, well, I agree with Robert Brownstein, and also, you know, what we saw in regards to what happened, an example with COVID and our mayor, and how he wanted to push everybody back into the workplace to make money for the city. And the thing is, and we're seeing it even till today, he got I spoke to the people who work in building. They had to be back, the inspector people, all those, the staff and everything had to be back very early. They only had 2 months to work at home. So he wanted everybody back in City Hall. And we're seeing it now. And the issue is, when you have a politician who is vulnerable to to get these campaigns that he has to do, we see it over and over, the SVO supporting our politicians. And this is how it's gone. It's Chamber of Commerce, and we're seeing the corruption that is happening. And so a political appointee, whereas the city manager doesn't have those risks. He has a job. He or she has a job, and they have employment. They don't have to keep every 4 months, every 4 years to get that job back. And so that's where the corruption comes in. And they're servicing the businesses and the corporations. They're not servicing the people. And so when we say that we give them more power is wrong, and because they are not making their decisions based on protecting us from harm. They haven't done that. That's why we have the pollution we have. That's why we have the climate crisis we have. They are serving the capitalism and consumerism that has brought us to ruin. And so we cannot be saying that this is the way to bring us to more solutions, is giving more power to our politics.
Paul Soto?
Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. I would like to thank you, Ms. Lazat, for letting me know that white supremacy is still alive and well, girl. I'll bet you have Clyde Arbuckle's History of San Jose.
Personal attacks are not appropriate. You can raise your hand again and we'll call on you again. You can criticize what they're talking about, but not them personally. Roland?
Thank you. So, first of all, I don't think there's a single person in the city that would disagree that something needs to happen. But the question is how and how fast. So the first thing I appreciate I'm getting an echo here. I don't know where it's coming from. The first thing I appreciate in the report is that it mandates city council concurrence. That's very important. And the next question is how soon does that concurrence need to happen? And in emergency, it's got to happen very, very fast. And I'm going to defer here to the city attorney because I believe that how fast this happens is contained in Government Code section 54956.5. And in emergency, you can convene a meeting of the council within an hour. Thank you.
Blair Beekman?
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thanks for this item. Thanks for the words of Robert Brownstein. It was really needed. It reminds me of my place kind of in how to talk about these issues. I hope I can just offer some good background in the work you're doing, and I don't ever want to hurt anybody's feelings in working on these things. You know, I just have the feeling, you know, the ideas of the strong mayor in terms of development, we are really ending that concept. And we're talking this whole time about ideas of community. And I think we're developing really interesting ideas. Now, it's from this that we are seriously talking about the strong mayor in terms of emergency services in our future. These are important subject matters. This is the subtlety that we're going to have to really, the back and forth that's hopefully that will take place. I don't know if hopefully is the right word, but hopefully we won't be talking about strong mayor in terms of development. But these are the conversations we're going to have to be having. I have sat through the flood events of 2017 and the COVID issues of 2020. There were serious problems in the beginning, just procedurally how to function as a city government, that they had serious problems and questions about that really need answers. And then I feel the sunshine and ordinance ideas and the ideas of technology accountability and its guidelines and its legal precedents set an incredibly important standard how we talk about our future of good public policy practices. That it just gives incredibly good examples how we can work and plan our future and our future of emergency situations where we're going to have to deal with these issues, and we need our open, good democratic practice to lead us through the times of war again, through the times of disaster. It's our good practices that do it. That has to be the starting point in how we're going to have a long debate on this future subject matter. Thank you.
Alina?
Thank you, Commissioner Lizotte, for that presentation, and I'm sorry to hear that you've had such a rough year, and I thank you for your dedication to this commission. I, however, do respectfully disagree. I think that what we need here, in the same that it was brought up recently that we need more time to study why we need more districts, I think we should study why it took the city manager so long to declare an emergency and what exactly happened during that time. I think there could be a lot more information in that process that would really help us create a better emergency plan. I do agree that we need a better emergency protocol. And I personally also volunteer at Code for San Jose, and they have been working on resources to actually provide the city with flood monitoring technology to prevent slow responses in the future. And so there are things that are happening already, and I think that if we focused on our emergency protocol procedures, that would be a better way towards providing a better service and solution for our community members. I do also echo Bob Brownstein's concerns because the lack of specificity in these powers and who defines them and how they are defined, and accountability measures of why does the mayor need all of this power, and why isn't it more about a specific response to the problem that is happening at hand. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Paul Soto?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the check, Tony. Second of all, white supremacy is alive and well in this city. And I sincerely mean that I want to thank the speaker for reminding me of that, reminding me that the work of social justice, the work of challenging the prevailing wisdom of the privileged class in this city that derived their privilege by the decapitations of Native Americans starting in July 14th, 1846, and the planting of the American flag by Thomas Fallon. That's why it was so critically important to remove that statue. And I have hundreds of hours of research behind doing that. It was Paul Soto. Yes. Secondly, is that the concentration of powers within the mayor and the police powers that she was describing is exactly what the framers of the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence had advocated directly against. And what Patrick Henry said, no, it was Benjamin Franklin, that those that want security at the expense of liberty are not worthy of the latter and do not deserve the former, end quote. This is a critical principle that I think needs to guide this conversation, because what she provided the city was a rationalization for shooting a man in the testicles, for breaking that man's knees, for that Tino that's standing there with the gun and antagonizing them. Is she providing a rationalization for their behavior? Is that what she is doing? This is the critical questions that need to be asked. And she needs to stand there and answer them. Why? Because she is the demographic that is represented within the context of that conversation wants protection by.
Lou Dimes?
Yes, I just want to say, my name is Lou Dimes, president of Black Outreach, the Black Lives Matter affiliated group, I guess you could say. But to bring Black Lives Matter protesting into the conversation of the mayor wanting to give himself more power in his seat is ridiculous. Black Lives Matter obviously does not support the mayor or any of the policies that he's been pursuing behind the Black Lives Matter movement since it kicked off here in the city. And to say there's a correlation between the two because we don't protest at city council members' homes, but we do protest at his home means that we want him to have more power is ridiculous. So if you're going to do this bullshit, then use your own bullshit, but don't bring us into y'all bullshit. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Commissioners, I'm going to go to Commissioner
Can I
Lizotte?
respond? Can I
Yes.
respond?
Yes, Commissioner Lizotte first.
Look, I have no stake in this. Absolutely none. We were charged with finding ways to change the charter for more accountability. And that was the purpose of this, making the mayor accountable if an emergency is declared by a non-elected official. Everybody went, everybody was looking to blame someone for the floods. I heard that people were really upset about the installation of a curfew. All of that was done by the city manager. And where did the public go when it's done by the city manager? If it's done by the mayor, then you have a place to go. You can recall them. You cannot vote them in again. You have a way to deal with your dissatisfaction with regard to something that happens under the emergency declaration. Number two, the Mr. Brownstein, went off on what powers does he have? Well, my memo clearly says that he has the powers that are enumerated in section 8.08.250. Those are the powers that the city manager has. And those powers are specifically the powers during a local emergency or a state of emergency. And only with regard to that, not with regard to a fire over here and you tear down person's property in another district. It only has to do with the emergency. So we're not expanding any powers beyond what the city manager currently has now, a non-elected person. The final thing is with regard to how long this emergency declaration is in effect before it has to be ratified. Right now, the manager can have this declaration in effect for 7 days before he or she has to bring it to the council. My memo said 72 hours or as soon as practicable. If you don't like as soon as practicable, fine. 72 hours, 48 hours, I really don't care. The committee said, let's go with 72 hours. That's what New York had. And if it isn't brought to the council within that time, or if it isn't ratified by the council, then it becomes null and void. So there's no great power grab by the mayor under these circumstances. So, I just wanted to set the record straight about why I brought this forward, what it's intended to do, which is to make an elected official liable and accountable for when an emergency is declared, so that the people know who to blame or thank. And I think it should be an elected official. But again, I have no skin in the game. I was going under the theory that we were supposed to be looking for more accountability out of government. And accountability doesn't come from a civil servant. It comes from an elected official. So any questions by my colleagues, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Commissioner Lizotte. Commissioner Callender.
Yeah, I was going to speak to this. This is it's an interesting dynamic. I served with Director Lizotte during one flood, and so it's kind of hard to separate. I don't envy her position on have to present in this when she had to sit on the board and withstand attacks from the community during the 2017 floods. And so I understand her view of accountability and understand exactly where she's coming from in terms of where the responsibility should lie. So I definitely don't blame the presentation, and I can see it through so many different advantages, as I'm sure that she can see it through so many different advantages of her as sitting on the board of the Santa Clara Valley Water District. The one thing I worry about is giving the mayor political power when it comes to calling an emergency. The hardest thing for any public servant or public official or a non-elected official to do is to call for the evacuation of the community. Every single public servant, including myself, at least the public administrators, has to go through what's called NIMS and SIMS training. The NIMS training is the National Incident Management System, and the SIMS is the Standardized Emergency Management System, and this is nationwide. And basically what it attempts to do is really keep the elected officials out of having to make that call because it becomes a political decision. And I extend exactly what Director Lizotte is saying, is it doesn't matter who makes the call. It's the mayor, it's the In the instance of the flooding, it's our board of directors. We had our EOC open, but you know who they don't blame the CEO of Santa Clara Valley Water District. They don't blame the lack of emergency management at the city of San Jose. They go to the mayor. They say the mayor didn't make the call, and the mayor was not responsible for making that call, but he's the face of the city. So I understand what we're saying, but what I would say is, from where I sit, is I would continue to encourage us to use the NIMS-SIMS management system and not to politicize the emergency. What I don't want to have happen is, in the instance of, I don't care if it's protest, I don't care if it's flooding, I don't care if it's earthquake, I don't care what the emergency is. It cannot be politicized. The ones that are trained, the ones that are knowing, the ones that basically, yes, their job is on the line if they make the wrong call, and their job should be on the line if they make the wrong call. But I don't want to politicize it. So I don't envy Director Lazat having to give this presentation. I know exactly where she sits. I've seen her on both sides of having to present here, and I've served with her on Valley Water before I was a CEO, and I know what the flooding has. So trust me, this is probably one of the most difficult situations, to sit there and hear the community blame you for things when others made the decisions, but you take the blame for the decisions that you didn't make because you're elected to sit in that seat, but yet you have to look at the public administrators to do the right thing. I heard somebody that brought up the situation and saying, well, let's look and see why San Jose didn't make this. There's been so many audits that have looked at this. And what I would say is, I would like for us to do the right thing. I do not want to give that power to the mayor. I do not want to have people on one side of the aisle or another coming at protesters that look like me and calling it an emergency situation when it's not, and it's people just trying to raise up their voice. Did the public administrator do the right thing in the Black Lives Matter? I don't think they did locally, but here's the thing. It should not be a political decision where people are sending in responses to their elected official and saying, you should do X or you shouldn't do X. I understand how difficult it is, but I would definitely encourage us to follow the national standard and to follow the standard that everyone's there. I don't envy the other entities that have the power to do it. I don't know how they got there, but I don't believe that they should have that power. All of you that have served in public administration roles, I'm looking at Frank Macy specifically, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly when these situations happen. No, it's not. This is not an elected decision. This is a decision for the health and safety of the community. You shouldn't have to think, if I do this, am I going to get recalled? If I do this, am I going to have constituents angry at me? What you're making is the right decision from the seat that you sit in and the oath that you took to make sure you're making that right decision. So that's where I am. I cannot support a proposal that would give more power to the mayor in emergency situations. Director Lazat, I appreciate what you put forward. I appreciate the difficulty of what you had to present. And then I understand where you're trying to go. Because like I said, I can see it on both sides and I understand where you're trying to go.
Thank you. Commissioner Segal.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. So I don't know if Linda wants to answer them after each one, or should I just state them all? Or
why don't you go ahead and state them all and then she can answer them.
Okay. So the first is there an expiration date? So there's like 72 hours, or what would trigger the expiration of the emergency powers? And what if the emergency like COVID goes on for 2 years or 3 years? Is that something that you guys have thought of?
It appears in the powers of the manager that it goes on for 30 days unless it's rescinded by the council. And it can also be extended, much like the emergency powers under the flood. The flooding was extended multiple times because there was a continuing emergency. And then it can be voided or stopped on a simple majority vote of the council.
Okay, prior to the 30 days or at any point. Okay, thank you for that. My next question was, I was taken aback by giving the mayor all of the powers. Was there a reason to not tailor it to the emergency?
Well, the powers are tailored to the emergency under this. Their powers listed only in the instance of an emergency. They're separate from whatever powers the mayor may have. And then these powers are listed in the municipal code. They're powers that the city manager has to marshal all of the assets that he needs to, to close roads, to do whatever is necessary for the health and safety and welfare of the community and property. So I didn't want to make up things when it's already in here, and it's probably the powers that are in here are probably what is in under the things that Mr. Callender was talking about. There's systems in place that say what the possible powers might be needed.
Okay. And how would you respond to the question that was brought up? What if the then mayor wants to just fire everybody he didn't like who's working in the city during this period of time? Is that something that could be written into the policy to maybe?
That's not one of the enumerated powers.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. What is the reason that we think the city manager can't do their job in an emergency? Why can't city council, for example, declare the emergency by a supermajority vote, and then an emergency plan would be activated and the city manager would do their job? I guess I'm not clear on that.
So let's go back to the flood. At the time of the flood, there was no emergency action plan between the city and the water district. There now is. And what that does is that says what entity does what when, what jurisdiction, calls the emergency, what jurisdiction calls out the police, what jurisdiction does an evacuation, what jurisdiction, cleans up. So that's an emergency action plan that we now have in place that we didn't before. And so with regard to what, I think you were asking what defines an emergency. As Mr. Callender was talking, there's certain protocols about what needs to be done and when an emergency should be, and there's training, et cetera. And in fact, in my memo, I say that one of the potential downsides of doing this is that the mayor or, as in the case of Los Angeles and San Francisco, where the mayor has embedded in his staff people who take all of that training that the emergency services director and the emergency services personnel take to determine when an emergency needs to be called. Mm-hmm. The mayor or a designated group of people in his or her office would take that training as well. They're not acting in a vacuum. The mayor would not suddenly wake up and say, oh, it's raining too much, I think I'll declare an emergency. The mayor would be consulting with his emergency services director, with his police officers, with his fire department, with all of the different people. This is just who makes that declaration and who's going to be accountable to the people for that declaration. That's the only purpose of me doing this. All of the protocols and all of the training that goes into it, and all of the assets and all of the staff that do this, as Mr. Callender was talking, would be available to consult with the mayor. I mean, when the emergency was called for the flood, I talked to Ray Reardon at the city of San Jose. The city manager, the three people he had in his office were the fire chief, the police chief, and the city manager, because at the time they didn't have an emergency department head. And so they got together and they said, yep, we need to declare an emergency. So I envision the same thing doing that. The only difference is an elected official who's accountable to the public makes that decision. And, but he or she is not acting in a vacuum to do that. And there is the downside of the political decision. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There could be a political decision by a very savvy city manager. And I've seen 2 or 3 of them in my time when I was on the city council. They knew the politics of what they were doing. And so, that is a danger. I'm not disputing that.
I guess just lastly, I'm not exactly clear on why we think the city manager can't declare the emergency and keep all of his or her powers and manage the emergency. Why are we taking that power away and giving it to an elected official who doesn't have all the professional training that the city manager has? Is that a punishment for that one city manager who didn't declare, or what? I don't understand.
No, I brought it forward as an accountability issue. Who's going to be accountable to the public if things go good or things go bad? An elected official or an administrator? And you know, like I said, the mayor isn't going to be acting in a vacuum when he or she makes this decision. He or she will still have all of these people around. It's just a matter of having the powers to declare and then the powers to make decisions with regard to, like in the regard to the protest, you know, declaring a curfew. I mean, I heard from a lot of people how aggravated they were that a curfew had been called when there was no, in their mind, there was no need for a curfew at all. And who do you go after? That's when they went to the mayor's office at the home, I'm sure. So, like I said, I have no skin in the game, you know, with regard to this. I was looking at it from an accountability standpoint of who does the public go to if an emergency goes wrong or if an emergency goes right. And, you know.
Thank you. Commissioner Matsumura?
Thank you. You know, and I want to say from the perspective of the subcommittee, it's helpful to have these questions raised. I think they're consistent with some of the questions that we had started to raise. And I will say late in our game, and want to apologize for that, because I raised some questions late due to my own absences from committee meetings. You know, and I think it's going to be helpful for us to bring this back to really dig into some of the language, right? Because, you know, there's a stated intent here around consultation with staff, you know, and do we have that adequately reflected in the language? I think also, you know, there's this piece about referencing that particular section of the city code. And my reading of it is that it actually gives very broad powers. So, you know, I think a committee meeting is going to be a good space for us to really dig in and get clear on what does the language say, how do we align it with intent, to then ultimately be able to have a good, strong debate should the commission choose to bring this forward. Or I guess we'll have another chance in a couple of weeks about the substance of it. But I do value, excuse me, the questions that the public and commissioners are raising about, you know, the consultation with staff, how broad or narrow the powers are, as well as, you know, sort of the tension around the roles of professionals versus the roles of elected officials.
Thank you. Commissioner Matzke.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add that when we discussed this, we did recognize that if the mayor were to have this authority, the mayor would be responsible to take all the FEMA training and to understand exactly what that role had, because they would be directing staff, and that they would have to understand how the staff works in terms of responding to an emergency. So it's a significant leap forward, and the mayor will be responsible. And it was, you know, we thought, well, let's see what the rest of the commission had to say. So I just want to add that.
Thank you. Commissioner Fuentes.
Thank you. Let's see. I think this whole proposal is bringing up a lot of opportunities for discussing emergencies and what happens. And maybe Commissioner Lizotte, this wasn't your intention to have such a broad scope in looking at this recommendation, but I think that the more I've thought about it, I can easily see the flood and the natural disasters, and I believe the proposal is in essence to give the power that already exists for the city manager over to the mayor. So it's not like it's new powers, it's existing powers, as I understand it. But I think if it's possible, that our subcommittee should look into the, well, let me put it this way. I think we need to look into how we handle the civil unrest part of the emergency. And I think, personally, I think I would like us to really look what happened, since it's been brought up, with the George Floyd protest, because this is actually a very difficult point in our history of what all happened in that event. And it's more than just, you know, what the mayor did or didn't do and what he was blamed for and things like that. But it's also the response to people who were exercising their freedom of speech. And I'll just share that that I was there at the protest on Sunday, and the way I saw law enforcement lined up against small protesters, the way I was part of a group that marched from City Hall all the way to San Fernando Street and back up, I believe, 7th Street. And meanwhile, the police officers were driving by with their sirens on, and we weren't doing, I mean, we were a small group. I mean, we were probably 3 people wide, and there was probably, I don't know, maybe 100 people that were just marching. You know, I what I'm trying to say is that as we're looking at transferring the power over to the mayor, or even as we're looking at the powers of emergencies, I think I would recommend that our commission take this seriously and also look at how whether it's a city manager or the mayor who has the power to declare an emergency when there is protesting, how that is done. And if we could look at that, and I honestly believe that the people that are sitting here around the table would have very good insight into how we can improve it and do it in a better way. Because I mean, I can say that what happened in that protest, I mean, there's 2 sides to what happened, and I think we should. I really believe that we need to look at this, and I think we have to be very careful with what we recommend, because even just the topic of giving power to the mayor around these types of events, and again, I'm not talking about the natural disasters. I'm talking about, you know, say civil unrest, is something that has a lot of reaction in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Waitran?
Thank you. You know, this is a big topic and definitely one of the major issues that we're charged with looking at. And considering that we're looking at this in a very narrow scope and how deeply invested people are in terms of this conversation, it's actually very helpful to hear different perspectives. So right now, the way I'm hearing this is that we're really looking at accountability. I'm looking at this as an accountability issue versus a politicization issue, right? I mean, when we're talking about natural disasters, when we're talking about that, I mean, I really don't think the risk is there that in 72 hours, you're going to have a mayor usurp power of the entire government and then just sack everybody and say, I'm now the dictator, right? Like, even if they did do that, it lasts all of 72 hours. I'm pretty sure the accountability would come very quickly after that. That said, though, you know, there is kind of a marked difference here when we're talking about natural disasters to civil unrest, because the nature of the emergency in moments of civil unrest is inherently political. And so for me, I think that is kind of where we have to find a little more balance, or maybe more define the proposal to make sure that only specific enumerated powers are exercised. You know, during the protests, during the last summer, right? The one thing that I thought, the one point that does stand out for me is that, you know, if people are going after the mayor, but it was the city manager who made that decision, then there's not really accountability there, because the wrong person is, in a sense, being held accountable. By allowing these powers to shift over to the mayor, and the mayor making these decisions, then that person can be held accountable, right? Voters don't turn out and get rid of the city manager. It doesn't work that way, right? Voters can turn out and get rid of the mayor at some point. So, I mean, in that sense, it does seem this is not an unreasonable proposal. I think this actually can be sound. But I do want to make sure that when we're talking about very clearly defined powers, very clearly defined ways that the manager that the mayor can utilize these powers, I think that becomes very important.
Thank you. Commissioner Segal.
Thank you. I think that it gets back to who can fire the city manager. And my understanding is that the council can vote to do that. Am I right about that, Mr. Tran? And so there still is accountability to the voting public, because our elected representatives can get rid of the city manager if the city manager isn't acting appropriately in response to disasters. But I would make a friendly amendment to limit the transfer of the proposal to basically the transfer of power of emergencies to the mayor, to limit that to natural disasters only. And I think that I would consider it if with that friendly amendment, just limiting, and that would get rid of all of the problems that Commissioner Callender brought up, that the Black Lives Matter representative brought up, the civil unrest piece of it that Commissioner Fuentes brought up. I think if we just limit it to natural disasters, that might address it. So that would be my friendly amendment.
Anyone else? Commissioner Matsumura.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to speak before, sort of with the committee hat on, saying, hearing some of what the commission was saying, and the need to perhaps align intent with language. I do want to say overall that although I think it's important for us to continue in a process to really hash through a thoughtful proposal, that I continue to have serious concerns with it along the lines of what Commissioner Callender raised. I appreciate the thought to limit it to natural disasters only, but I think we have to consider, we have to be designing our system of checks and balances with the worst case scenario in mind, in terms of who has power in this scenario, and in particular, who's sitting in that mayor's seat. All humans are fallible. It certainly applies to city council, it applies to mayor, it applies to city manager. And the only and best tool that we have to deal with that in government is to have systems of checks and balances in place. So where we are significantly talking about shifting power to the mayor, I am trying to consider a scenario where we have a mayor who perhaps has been in office for a week, perhaps has never been in elected office before. We certainly are in a period in our country's history where there's a lot of interest in electing people to office who have no prior experience in government. And how is a mayor with this kind of power going to behave in that case? And I appreciate Commissioner Tran's point about kind of how much havoc can be reached in 72 hours, but I think in the case of an emergency, it could be a lot. So take the scenario of the flood, right, where those early hours were really critical. And what if we had in that case a mayor holding this power, who was, in our opinion, overly politically motivated, and saying, we don't want to blow this up too much, we don't want to make too big of a deal of it, maybe the flood's not going to happen, we don't want to wake people up, right? And for political reasons had made a bad call, and irreparable damage would have happened in those first 72 hours. And I appreciate that we added the piece about the emergency training for the mayor, but that's just going to be different from the kind of training that professional staff bring in. And so, you know, I also really appreciate the intent of aligning, creating greater accountability. I think what we're doing here, though, is in order to have accountability, we're actually increasing the power of the mayor. And I believe what we should be doing is increasing the accountability of the mayor. I don't think that we should, in order to have the public perception and the desire for accountability align with reality, that we therefore put a lot of power in an elected official without checks and balances in a way that may create serious problems for the city in an emergency. I think there's too much at stake, and we've got to look at other mechanisms for accountability.
Thank you, Commissioner Matsumura. Commissioner Monley.
Thank you. Well, it seems to me that we are here discussing this because of two specific incidents in which we were not pleased with the, as a public, with the emergency response. So I can't really tell if we're talking about just leaving it as it is and get used to it, or if we are talking about transferring that emergency power to someone else. I have to say, I think it's not a standalone that a mayor would be charged with emergency powers and have no skill at it at all, because I think what would go along with this would be the skill set that would be required of a mayor under an emergency situation. I mean, presidents are elected to govern the United States and have to call for emergency responses on, sadly, a regular basis. But I don't think these are standalone. So that I just would kind of like to know what we are thinking of as an alternative then. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Monley. Commissioner Callender.
All right. Well, first I want to compliment Commissioner Matsumura on her very eloquent description of what I was saying. I think she hit it right on the head. You know, I was sitting here and thinking, and then heard what Commissioner Monley had said is what are we saying? Are we about to change? And I want to take folks back to 1997. That was actually 1 year after I had joined Valley Water, and we had floods in the Rock Springs area. I believe it was 2 years before then Councilmember Lazat had joined the city council. She joined in, I believe it was 1999. She can correct me if my memory if it's wrong, but I believe that's when she joined. When the flooding occurred, the first thing that they didn't have the city of San Jose did not have an emergency services department at the time, and so finger pointing went everywhere, and they wagged all the way over to then Mayor Ron Gonzalez, saying that he didn't make the call for calling for the evacuation before the flooding. Well, what the problem was, it wasn't the accountability of the mayor. It was the fact that they weren't following the NIMS methodology of emergency services, and they didn't even have the ability to call for the evacuation in time. I am a strong believer that I do not want to support the politicizing of the emergency calls of evacuations and other emergencies. That's just where I sit, and that's the professional public administrator in me. Yes, there are also other issues as it relates to protests and how different communities are treated. I'm just going to point towards January 6th in the Capitol, and I'll say, what do you think would have happened if that was a Black Lives Matter movement and an administrator had called for an emergency? Let's be real here. I think that what we need is non-politicization of the emergency services system. And then I know Commissioner Monley had brought up, the president's role in emergencies. I'll just bring up two names when it relates to you, and let you see what you think about what an emergency would look like if the two names of Donald Trump and an emergency was called, and how the reaction would have been. I will stand firmly on where I am. I am not, I will never support the politicizing of emergency management. I think it should be a professional public administrator's job. And I believe that if a public administrator does not make the right call, then their job should be on the line. If they didn't do the right thing, then the council should act accordingly and get rid of that individual. The mayor or no other elected official should be jammed into the role of being forced from hearing from the public and others and what they should do. You would never believe how many comments from all different sides that I've seen when it comes to natural disasters. We should not force elected officials to have to endure making the call because they're afraid of what may happen at the next election. That's where I sit, and I will not move or budge from that position.
Mr. Lazat.
Yeah, great discussion. I just, the concerns that have been voiced, I can understand them, but I want to reiterate that a large percentage of cities, big and small, have the elected official make that call. New York, San Francisco, LA, Seattle, you know, those were just some of the few that I grabbed, as well as small cities. And I don't see the horrors or the potential horrors that have been expressed as concerns evident in those cities. They've had it for a long time, and if I had not found any big cities that were doing this, and not a preponderance of big cities doing this, I probably wouldn't have brought it forward. But when New York, LA, and San Francisco are doing it, I'm thinking, San Jose is always saying, why don't we get any respect? And compared to San Francisco, and here's an opportunity. I don't want to bore you by reading you the powers that the city manager has, but they all have to do with life and safety, health and safety, and protection of life and limb. And they're very limited. In one city, they elaborate. They go on forever in elaborating. When I talked to Ray Reardon at the city of San Jose, he said that theirs are very, very general because they didn't want to, go way out. But one of the cities I looked at, the mayor had the power to seize guns, to close gun stores, to seize. It just went on and on. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, how did this ever get past anybody? Whereas, and that, maybe that has to do with the, where it was and what part of the country it was, and the concern about certain elements. But all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 powers. It's all the city manager has, and it all has to do with marshaling assets, talking to department heads, instituting anything that helps with rules and regulations that help with public safety, and that's probably where the curfew comes from. But we'll take your discussions back to the committee, and we'll see what happens on. We're doing this Saturday again. What happens on Saturday? But this is I understand the difference between protests and natural disasters, that may make it tricky. But those were the two most recent calls of an emergency, that happened within the city within our recent memory, and that's why I used them as examples. No other reason. It could have been a flood and then an earthquake. It just happened to be those two instances. So, like I said, I have no skin in the game in this, and whatever happens, I'm fine with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lazat. Commissioner Depp.
I think it's always easy to look back on something that already happened and kind of second guess and how would we have done things differently, knowing what we know in the moment. But if you go back to the prior, the decision point, it's not quite as easy. And I think, we can criticize as I'm one of the people who would, the city's flood response or the curfew response or to the protests. One, I think we acted too slow. The other, we acted too soon. But in the context of, I remember that day before we called the curfew. Someone from the mayor's office called me and told me hours ahead that this was going to happen. And I had this response and I had this discussion and I kind of pushed back. Is this really necessary? And the response was there's intelligence and we're seeing these things happen in other cities. And you kind of just have to clam up and say, all right, we shouldn't second guess this. One person should steer the ship and that's you. So go ahead. I think it's just important to remember that we're talking about the moment of emergency here, and it's not calm times. There's a fire burning somewhere, or an earthquake, or a flood impending, something impending happening, and in an after event report, you always kind of look through that, and the people who make the decisions they do have reason for it. It's not arbitrarily done. You can disagree that you might have done something differently. You might weigh the evidence differently, but those people, I feel, are making the decisions, to the best of their ability, given the circumstances. And the reason that but I think it's important to be said that politicalization is another way of saying judgment, and judgment is always, debatable, right? But I think there's something to be said for having accountability to the mayor, who's accountable to the public, but also having the public accountable for electing people who they feel have the judgment to make these sort of decisions, right? Yes, you could have a city manager hypothetically lose their job over something, but the pressure for that on a city council to call for some of these jobs is different than the public going directly to the polls and recalling or unelecting or not re-electing somebody they voted for. And I think it's important to align that. So I appreciate what Commissioner Lazat's doing, and I would support her proposal. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Jeff. Is there anyone else? Commissioner Calendar, your hand's up again.
One last time, this issue, I try not to comment too much of the issues. This issue definitely touches a nerve. And I do want to thank Commissioner Lazat. This is one that I would not have recommended she take on because of the personal nature of her service. It's so many different capacities, and maybe that's why she ended up having to carry the ball on this one. But in all seriousness, when I look to this and when I looked at what happened, when we had the Black Lives Matter movement downtown, and when we had the issues that came up, and if we have to wait for 3 years to hold somebody accountable to elect them or re-elect them, that's not justice. Justice is instant action. If the city manager had made the call, if the folks that had made the call, they should have been held accountable. We shouldn't have to wait for every 4 years to decide if we're going to remember to hold you accountable for an emergency management decision that you make. I'll also point to one of the things that actually happened is actually Northern California. There was data that was being collected, and you had folks in the police management system that were told that a bus full of Antifa individuals were headed north in order to cause trouble. So they sent up police helicopters and otherwise helicopters and planes to find the bus full of individuals that were going to be coming to their town and causing trouble. It ended up being a QAnon, a QAnon fantasy that someone had made up. Well, this is where I don't want things to be politicized. I would hate to have a bus full of a Black family reunion headed north and have something go wrong because something was politicized, and the pressure of what was on the internet or otherwise ended up making people make wrong decisions. What had happened in that instance is probably within 1 hour of the information being given, it was knocked down, it was knocked back, and things were gone. I tell folks, go Google it. This is real. This actually occurred. So I am not a believer in the politicization of emergencies when it could impact my people in so many different ways. It doesn't matter if it's floods. It doesn't matter if it's earthquakes. It doesn't matter if it's fires. I would prefer to have public administrators held responsible. If that public administrator made the wrong call, then they should be responsible to the council, to the board, to the special district, to any agency that they report to. And the community should not have to wait for 4 years for justice. They should be able to understand that justice came in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Commissioner Callender. Anyone else? Commissioner Diep?
I just want to register my disagreement with the idea that justice should be swift. I think passions of the masses should be cooled by institutions, and even in our justice system, there's due process and argument and all that. So I just want to register that for the record.
Thank you. Commissioner Matsumura.
Thank you. I'll be brief, having spoken a couple times before. I was just able to finally pull up the municipal code again, and I think hopefully this can clarify. So the reference section, as Commissioner Lazat had said, A through D have very specific powers, but item E does say to execute all the ordinary powers as city manager, as well as all the special powers conferred on, currently says him or her. So that actually does mean that if we reference that section, all of the powers of city manager would be transferred to the mayor, the way I read it. So just since we've discussed that a little bit, I thought that clarification could be helpful, knowing that we're gonna go back to work on this, of course, as a committee.
And Attorney Vanny, if you could weigh in on that to the subcommittee, it'd be helpful. Does that mean that those powers of the manager only specifically in regards to the event
emergency
itself?
Yes.
Or is it a blanket kind of statement at the end? So I think the attorney should help us make sure that the subcommittee's reading of it is accurate to the law. That would be helpful.
Yeah, it'd be specific to the emergency, but remember this section was written with an eye towards the city manager having the authority during the emergency. And the city manager has the authority to hire and fire people. The mayor under the charter currently does not. And it would also require a charter amendment to implement this, because there is a provision that says that the council can't interfere with staff and the affairs of the city manager. So we'd have to carve out an exception for the mayor to act in this particular role. And our recommendation would probably be to update this section in order to conform to those changes.
So because it refers to the city manager, it's basically saying they have the emergency powers to do all these things for the emergency, and they keep their day job, right? They still maintain all the other powers that they have because they are the city manager. So that would be the place where there needed to be a revision. Otherwise, the mayor would be usurping all the powers of the city manager at that time. So it makes sense when it's a city manager. It doesn't make sense unless that's the intention when it becomes the mayor. So manager still has his day job, still got to do everything else. In addition, has these special powers that are specific to the emergency. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Commissioner Matsumura has her hand up.
That's what I was wondering. Did you just
Oh,
spoke?
yeah, no, sorry, I just failed to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no other hands, we will now move to our next item on the agenda. Thank you for that very fruitful discussion. It gives lots of thought to go back to our subcommittee, whose work is cut out for them. And I want to thank them on behalf of the commission for all their work in being able to present tonight's presentations. We have hopefully a short item, the subcommittee reports. This is it. Are there any questions from a subcommittee to another subcommittee that we need to do in public? I doubt there are, but I just wanted to make sure it is on the agenda. Commissioner Brosio.
Commissioner, you're muted.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening, everyone. In regards to the climate change presentations, if that was to be taken on by a subcommittee, where would it be best aligned in? I'm assuming one subcommittee in particular would be able to take it on. And I wonder if that accountability subcommittee has the bandwidth to take it on.
It was brought to us by that subcommittee, so that's where it's being heard.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the point of clarity.
That's part of their study session. Any other questions for subcommittees? Commissioner Segal.
Thank you. Just in response to Commissioner Barroso, I think our consultant is looking into getting us additional speakers on climate change. So perhaps he could give a report on that. I think he's also doing research on different cities that have climate change commission as part of their charters. So I'll just pass that over to the consultant, but we are looking to get you more information and more speakers on that for our last speaker day.
Thank you, Commissioner Segal. Commissioner Fuentes.
Thank you. I have a question too related to the question of equity and inclusion, and wanted to know if the policing committee is going, who brought the presenters to the meeting, if you're going to cover that, because I've been working on something related to equity with respect to the charter and language related to the city budget. So I wanted to know if your committee is doing that, or do we coordinate together, or what do we do?
We are not touching the budget. And I guess I'm not familiar with what you're working on.
Well, okay, in looking at the areas for the governance committee, one of the topics was budget. And so that's been something that I've been looking at, and I was able to get the assistance from Lawrence and his team on some questions, and one of them had to do specifically with equity. And there's various questions. And then also, after listening to the presentations that we heard on September 9th, I was absent, but I listened to them a couple of times. After the meeting, I see how it's all going to fit together, that we look at the situation. Well, this is the way I'm looking at it, looking at the situation in our city, and looking at the disparities and the importance of addressing equity in the equity and inclusion in the city charter, which in the city charter where it's not addressed. So it's along those lines.
Bob Brownstein, he presented some language, charter amendments, some equity language. So that is something that our subcommittee will be talking about. If there's specific things regarding budgets and equity in the budget, we haven't talked about that yet, and we don't have plan. I wouldn't know how to coordinate with you under the Brown Act. Commissioner,
that's my question too.
Commissioner Calendar, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, let me ask this. Commissioner Fuentes, I thought the governance committee had made their recommendations already. Do you have an additional one?
Yes.
Okay. We need to talk about when that's going to be presented, because that's got to get on the schedule if it's coming from your subcommittee. Let's take that offline, and then I can respond back to Commissioner Siegel. I think they are aligned but not conflicting, as I understand, but let me take that offline to figure out how we address that issue and be in respect of the Brown Act as well. Thank you, Commissioner Fuentes, for bringing that up. That helps us to get organized here.
Thank you.
Anything else?
And I would just ask, given that, are there any other recommendations from the governance structure subcommittee or voting in elections? Our official kind of call for final recommendations to share has passed for both subcommittees. So I'm a little hesitant to say, let's go back to the well, but we are kind of winding down our ability to be able to go through the same process with every recommendation. That is presentation to commissioners, public hearing, feedback, and then revisiting, revising, and doing provisional voting. So if there's anything else left on the table, we need to know about it as soon as possible.
And Commissioner Amador.
I just had a question about, I know that what was presenting today about the redistricting with our feedback, is that going to come back to the table? Just want to clarify that.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask the city clerk to help us on that, to make sure that we understand what we can find out from the redistricting committee. I know some of their deliberations are different than ours, and in terms of what they can share. So I'll ask the city clerk for that, and if we can get a report back from them and what that can contain, that'll be one of the things that we do in follow-up this week. Commissioner Segal.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just forgot to take my hand down, but I think that maybe the consultant does want to give a, I'm wondering if he wants to give a report to answer Commissioner Barosio's question.
Yeah, I'm going to ask him to do that in his report time, which is coming up because it's an addition to the work plan. Any other questions of subcommittees to subcommittees? So we have follow-up on the redistricting committee. We have follow-up with Commissioner Fuentes on the budget. Okay, awesome. I'm going to move us to our next item, which is old business. I don't have a report.
Chair, I think you need to take public comment.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the questions of the subcommittee to the other subcommittees?
Yes, there are hands up. Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for this item. Blair Beekman here. Yeah, Bob Brownstein's words a few weeks ago about how we can talk about the future of affordable housing within the charter process. Doesn't have to be so specific, but some broader ideas. He gave a great example how we can work towards that, and I think can be applicable to many other projects and subjects within how we talk about the future of the charter. I think he gave a great example with that. The ideas, to quickly try to mention, the ideas of equity in accounting in San Jose, it's been kind of an important subject, and it kind of works to help the equity projects that San Jose City government works on with community. And it works, you know, with and without and around and about, and it does some interesting stuff. And I just thought I'd bring that out, but San Jose has been doing some interesting work with it on all sides. The city of Oakland, I think, is a kind of a peer right now in we're really working towards ideas of reimagine more than most other Bay Area cities. So congratulations to that. But they're having a bit of trouble with their accounting and equity ideas. They've got their reimagine council going on projects, but auditing and equity is not working out too well. They're not aligning. So good luck how we can work on the issues, and please try to be able to work on for the future the subcommittee process. Meeting minutes process that can clearly explain what subcommittees were about, and to make sure to offer steps when you have public hearings in the future, what you were talking about those subcommittees to make the public hearings relevant to what we're discussing at public hearing time. And so good luck in those connections, and thank you.
Alina.
Thank you. Thank you to all for your work on these proposals. I'd also like to apologize to Commissioner Marshman. I misspoke earlier during Commissioner Lazalt's presentation. So my apologies, and thank you again.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to reports. I don't have a report from the clerk. I'm not sure, does the clerk have anything to report at this time?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. And so now we're at the update from the consultant.
Great, thank you. I want to walk you through the changes that we made to the work plan given the directive during the last commission meeting to move ahead as soon as possible on the final voting for timing of mayoral elections. So this is the updated revised work plan that was sent out on Friday. You'll see that we have September 20th today, September 25th, this Saturday, as a reminder, we have a public hearing on the governance and structural recommendations that are being heard for the first time tonight. Next Sunday, we have a study session, which will incorporate the topics of police.
Next Monday.
Excuse me, next Monday. Thank you, September 27th. Topics of police accountability and oversight, sacred land acknowledgements, and climate change, particular possibility of a climate change commission. The guest speakers that are listed here are confirmed. We are in conversation with the City and County of Honolulu, who did adopt a charter change, which led to a climate change commission. So hoping to confirm that as well for next Monday's study session, and that will be a study session only. And the next meeting where we could do the final voting on the timing of mayoral elections recommendation would be Monday, October 4th. So in addition to having provisional voting and final discussion, or at least discussion before the provisional voting on the governance structure subcommittee recommendations, we had added the final voting on timing of mayoral elections recommendations. And then the other item, the other change here, the rest of the calendar has stayed the same as far as the final reports and review and timeline for delivery. But we did add another study session on Monday, October 25th, on topics still being identified and finalized. We will have two guests about the function of auditing, both at the city and a guest from the County of Santa Clara. So those are the updates for now. Reminder, the final recommendations for the Policing Municipal Law Accountability and Inclusion Subcommittee are due, will be discussed November 1st. So they will be due on October 29th. And really that is and that's so we can get them in this previously scheduled public hearing on November 6th, also on a Saturday. So this is really kind of the wind down here of our ability to take recommendations and share them to the public in the same process, and then bring them back to commission for you all to discuss and do final voting. So that's the update on how we have revised the schedule based on your desires. And I see a comment from Commissioner Lazat, her hand.
Yeah, Lawrence, I printed off the work plan today.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about September 27th, it's not what I have on mind. So where are you reading that from? Did I get the wrong one? There's nothing about climate change.
Yeah, well, climate change, it doesn't say climate change as a topic here. Apologies, there probably should be unconfirmed speaker on climate change here. You know, we're like I said, still trying to confirm that speaker. So, but do you see the rest of the speakers here? I guess the question I would have, did you download it from the email or from the website? It's possible it's not updated on the website. If you download it from the email that Megan, Commission Secretary, sent, that we should be working off the same thing.
I'm not sure where I downloaded it, but mine says confirmed guest Sergio Perez.
Do you see October 25th? Because that's brand new on.
Yes.
Okay, so we're working off the same thing. Apologies that there's
what you were talking about, climate change and having an indigenous people speaker, I don't see any of that in this thing that I'm reading.
Yeah, you're right. I did not update these speakers here. My apologies, and
Okay.
We'll get that done.
All right. I wasn't.
Thank you for that catch. We're,
Sure.
you know, we've heard from you all that you want to have the speakers updated on the agenda and in the work plan, and we're committed to doing that. So thank you for keeping us accountable. Other questions on this? All right. I did hear from the city clerk that she did have an update to share as it relates to virtual meetings. Chair, do you want to go to the city clerk now?
Yes, please.
Hi, this is really quick. AB 361 was signed by the governor Thursday evening. This will allow us to continue virtual meetings through the declared emergency. We expect the declared emergency to at least go through January. So we will be continuing with fully virtual meetings. The only provision that's slightly different than our current provisions is if Zoom goes down, then we pause the meeting until it comes back up, which we would need to do anyway because we're fully virtual. But other than that, we will stay virtual. Let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, any final questions? Seeing none, then I'm going to move to the public.
There was a hand from Commissioner. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Then I'll go to the public to comment on the work plan additions.
Roland? Roland, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I'm getting an echo. The request is that you post the updated work plan on the website as soon as possible, please. Thank you.
Blair Beekman?
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I just had to quickly wash my hands. Thank you for this item. I am interested how you have work plan ideas of auditing in through mid-October. Thank you. It's my real sincere hope that the ideas of reimagine the city manager's letter brought out a few weeks ago can be negotiated, and it can become easier to talk about a negotiation process that I think by mid-October can yield some good results for all sides. I think we can come to some interesting ideas how to move forward on the future, how we'll talk about reimagine. Good luck in those efforts, and thank you.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Mr. Beekman just reminded me, we're also looking at connecting with the Reimagine Committee and getting their report back to the commission as well. So at this point, we will take up an item that has been tabled until tonight, which is the discussion and possible action on the Charter Review Commission bylaws. I don't know if the city attorney wants to report on them. It's been a while since folks looked at them. If there are people have comments around them, do we want to take action on them? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just referring to the memo that I drafted on July 30th. The bylaws were put together using the template that other boards and commissions use for their bylaws in Council Policy 0-4. Some edits were made in order to conform the bylaws to the council resolution that establishes commission, namely the role of the chair and when the chair can vote and how the chair is selected. As far as the recital language goes, that was developed in conjunction with the commissioners who had volunteered. And so I provided a clean version of it, as well as track changes. And I apologize, it's not in blue and red, but strike throughs and the additions are there. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Does anybody have any questions? Commissioner Hugh Tran.
Thank you. No questions. But in terms of some of the revisions, along with Vice Chair Johnson and Commissioner Fuentes, we wanted to make sure we incorporated some of the earlier decisions of the commission around our focus and with the lens that we would be adopting as we considered these proposals. So there were no procedural changes to what the template bylaws charter bylaws set out already. But we did make sure we wanted to include in the whereas clauses to reflect the values and the goals of the commission. So those would be the first 4 whereas clauses. But through the rest, again, there really aren't any substantive changes to any of the operative provisions.
Thank you, Commissioner Tran. Anyone else have thoughts or comments? All right, Commissioner Callender.
Is an action needed from us, or are we okay to just move forward? I'm trying to understand where we are.
Thank you for your question. I was just about to say the same thing. We can take a motion if somebody wants to take action. If we take no action, we simply move on. We will hear from the public on this issue because it's an agendized item, but it's really the pleasure of the commission at this point. So I would entertain a motion, or I would entertain no motion at this time, and we can go to the public on either one. Pleasure of the commission, Commissioner Tran.
I'll move to adopt the bylaws as proposed.
Okay, and a second to that?
I will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Callender. Any discussion on the motion before we go to the public? Seeing none, then I'll ask for the clerk to call the public on the issue of the adoption of bylaws for this commission.
Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I hope these words can be relevant to this item. As you're going to be working on, final deadlines, like by mid-November or late November and mid-December, I'm understanding that the election things for the mayor has to be all ready to go by, say, May 2022. I hope that, the other study processes that you're going through, if needed, it can possibly be granted extension time. I don't know how long that extension time may need to be. There is a really important COVID-19 economic study forum that San Jose will be starting up soon. And I don't quite know if your group should have a place with that group, but that may be too political. But to have some sort of say and possibly some help in how that group will function, maybe as a study resource, could be an important concept that to mention at this time as you're trying to decide these things. Thanks for your patience and just hearing me out and idea sharing. Thank you.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, I'll call for the question and ask the clerk to take the roll.
I'll take the roll. Barbara Marshman?
Yes.
Christina Johnson?
Yes.
Elizabeth Monley?
Yes.
Ellie Matsumura?
Yes.
Enrico Callender?
Aye.
Frank Maitsky?
Yes.
Garrick Percival?
Yes.
George Sanchez?
Yes.
Hui Tran?
Yes.
Jeremy Bruce? Jeremy Bruce? Jose Posadas?
Yes.
Len Diep?
Aye.
Linda Lizotte?
Yes.
Luis Barrocio?
Yes.
Magnolia Siegel?
Yes.
Maria Fuentes? Maria Fuentes? Sammy Robledo?
Yes.
Sherry Segura, T. Tran,
Yes.
Tobin Gilman,
Yes.
Veronica Amador,
Yes.
Yang Zhao.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the commissioners who worked on that document. At this time, I'd like to call for the open forum of the public. So these is comments to that the commission, you believe the commission needs to hear on an item that's not been on our agenda. The clerk can call the first speaker, please.
Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. This was a really, really interesting meeting, and one that probably should be shared in the future of our process as a guideline of how we're working. So thank you. To quickly conclude my thoughts from the previous item, you know, to be available to be allowed just to continued study of yourselves with no pressure is what can be interesting as well. A very much of a thank you for the item talking about strong mayor and emergency issues to Commissioners Matsumura, Segal, and Fuentes, who just opened up the door for me how to much better think of this process in terms of council itself. We're talking about a few items of subtlety about the future of a strong mayor, but that really can be balanced with the ideas of new concepts of what council can be allowed to do. And I hope you'll be exploring those ideas. Those are just as valid and as important as these strong mayor things. And what my point I was talking about, ACLU surveillance and technology ordinance ideas from 2014 that I think are having an effect on your decision making at this time. It's like an old Mother Hubbard here, that it is meant to talk about overall practices, how we can work together. And that's what I'm trying to address. So what the commissioners addressed about how to invite the council more to the process for the future of the strong mayor is just awesome. And so good luck what you'll be working towards. And you know my feelings very well now about, we're talking in a good way about things. And I think this is as far as we can go with the strong mayor stuff. And good luck what you can do with it. Good luck how we can prepare for upcoming possible earthquakes in the next few years and decades.
Roland.
Thank you. So this is a brief follow-up on something I suggested, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago to the governance committee. Is that instead of having a city council when you have more council members, is to think more about a layered approach between the individual council members, however many they are, and the individual communities. Because as some of you have pointed out tonight, some of them kind of tend to turn off, you know, the day after the election. And if you follow the London model, that would be very difficult for them to do, because essentially they're like, you know, mini mayors, and they have got multiple monthly meetings. And if one of them decided to be disengaged, well, it would be a lot like a mayor not showing up at council meetings. So I'd really like you to think about this moving forward, and I'm going to do my very, very best to send you some pointers and some reading for you to think about it. Thank you.
Back to the commission.
Thank you. Appreciate the members of the public and their input tonight. I thank all the commissioners for your thoughtful presentations and great discussions. I'm going to adjourn us to our next meeting, which is this Saturday. We're scheduled for a public hearing September 25th at 11 o'clock. It will also be a virtual meeting. We will hear from the public again on the issues that were raised, the recommendations that were made tonight, and to be able to recognize the public's input from tonight and our public hearing, so that we can take a provisional vote at our regular meeting. Our next scheduled regular meeting of the Charter Review Commission is September 27th at 5:30, which is also going to be a virtual meeting. And until then, I'll see you on Saturday. We are adjourned for the night.
Mr. Chair, do we have Commissioner Callender's hand raised?
I just briefly wanted to thank the chairman for getting us out of here before the 10 o'clock hour. And I'm sure all the commissioners agree with me because this hasn't happened for weeks. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You can double my salary, Commissioner Calendar. I take it. Thank you all. Have a great night. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.